If it ever gets this bad, call. Emily Whitmore read those 6 words 3 times before her legs gave out. She had found the card tucked inside Jack's old riding jacket, the one she hadn't been able to touch since the funeral. 1 phone number, 6 words, and a handwritten note from a dead man who had somehow known that the world would try to break her after he was gone. The pension letter was still on the kitchen table. Benefits terminated. 2 words that had just stolen her future. Jack had been dead for 19 days. Before we go any further, if you have ever watched someone fight for what they were rightfully owed, if you have ever seen one person stand against a system that believed it was untouchable, this story is for you. Please subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Part 1, the letter that started a war. The morning started like every other morning had started since the funeral. Emily Whitmore woke up at 5:45 because that was the time Jack's alarm used to go off. His phone was gone. His alarm was gone. But her body still woke up at 5:45 every morning as if it was waiting for a sound that would never come again. She lay still for exactly 40 seconds. That was the amount of time it took for her brain to catch up with reality. 40 seconds where the world was still soft and uncertain, and Jack might have just been sleeping on the other side of the bed. 40 seconds before everything hardened back into the truth. 19 days. He had been gone for 19 days. Emily swung her legs over the side of the bed and put her feet on the floor and did what she did every morning. She walked to the kitchen. She filled the coffee maker. She stared out the window at the empty driveway where Jack's motorcycle used to sit, and she breathed through the hollow feeling in her chest until the coffee was ready. The letter was on the counter. She had read it 11 times already. She knew that because she had counted. Counting things was something she had started doing after the funeral because numbers were solid. Numbers stayed where you put them. Numbers did not leave without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. The letter was from the Maricopa County Pension Administration Office. It was 1 page long. The language was careful and bureaucratic and completely impersonal, the kind of language designed by lawyers to remove any trace of humanity from the words so that whoever had to read it would feel less like a person and more like a file number. Reference Whitmore John R. Case ID 77-4421-B. Notice of benefit termination. It is the determination of this office that survivor pension benefits for the above referenced case have been formally suspended pending investigation into the nature of the deceased's actions at the time of death. Based on preliminary review, it is the conclusion of this board that the circumstances surrounding the death of John R. Whitmore involve voluntary assumption of personal risk inconsistent with covered activity under County Statute 14B Section 7, Paragraph 3. Accordingly, all survivor benefits are hereby terminated, effective immediately. This decision is final unless appealed within 30 days through the formal petition process. Please be advised that petition hearings are subject to scheduling delays of up to 180 days. Emily set the letter down. She picked up her coffee cup with both hands and held it against her chest and breathed. 180 days, 6 months. Jack had worked for the county infrastructure department for 18 years. 18 years of driving long stretches of Arizona highway, inspecting roads, reporting hazards, filing reports that nobody ever read. 18 years of paying into a pension plan that was supposed to take care of his family if something happened to him. Something had happened. A family of 4 had been trapped inside an overturned minivan on Highway 60 during a flash storm 3 weeks ago. Emily knew the details because she had read the accident report so many times the paper was starting to soften at the folds. The rain had come suddenly and the road had flooded and the minivan had hydroplaned and rolled twice before stopping against a guardrail. Jack had been 200 yards behind them. He had pulled over. He had gotten out of his truck in the middle of a flash flood. He had pulled a woman and her 2 children and her husband out of that minivan before the water level rose high enough to make it impossible. All 4 of them had survived. Jack Whitmore had gone under the water while getting the last one out. His body had been recovered 3 hours later, 2 miles downstream. He had been 47 years old. Emily had been told by the first officer on the scene that Jack had saved all 4 members of the Reyes family. She had been told this while she stood in a hospital hallway in wet shoes because she had driven directly from work when she got the call. She had been told this by a deputy who looked like he was barely 25 years old, and who kept clearing his throat like he was trying to swallow something difficult. She had not cried until she was back in her car. She cried for 20 minutes. Then she drove home and called Jack's sister and made coffee and started doing what had to be done. Emily was not a woman who fell apart publicly. Jack had always called it her superpower, that ability to stay functional through the unsurvivable. She had held herself together through the funeral arrangements and the visitation and the ceremony at the funeral home, where 40 people she had never met showed up to tell her what Jack had meant to them. She had held herself together through the graveside service and the reception at her sister-in-law's house, and the long drive home afterward in a car that still smelled like Jack's leather jacket. She had held herself together for 19 days, and then the letter came. The pension office had determined that Jack's death resulted from voluntary personal risk, as if running into a flooding highway to save a family was a reckless choice. As if the man who had spent 18 years working for the county had somehow died incorrectly, and therefore his wife was not entitled to the only financial safety net they had ever had. Emily did the math that first night, sitting at the kitchen table with a notepad and a calculator. Their savings, $4,300. The mortgage, $1,100 per month. Her salary from the dental office, where she worked as a front desk coordinator, $31,000 a year. Jack's pension survivor benefit, $22,400 per year. Without the pension, she would be short every single month. Not dramatically short, not impossible short, but the kind of short that turns into credit card debt, and then into late payments, and then into a slow erosion that takes a person down so gradually they almost don't notice until they are already underwater. She thought about selling the house. She thought about it for a long time. Then she looked at the wall in the living room where Jack's photograph hung next to his motorcycle helmet and the folded flag from the funeral, and she thought about how that wall was the last real place that Jack existed in the world, and she could not make herself think about packing those things into boxes and moving them somewhere smaller and less. She had 30 days to appeal. She had no money for a lawyer. She had no political connections in Red Valley. She had nothing except a dead man's name and the knowledge that he had died saving 4 strangers. Emily refilled her coffee and walked back to the counter and stood there for a while looking at the letter. Then she walked to the bedroom closet. Jack's riding jacket was hanging on the far end of the rod, exactly where it had always been. She had not touched it since before the funeral. She had not been ready. She stood in front of it for a long moment. Then she reached out and ran her hand along the sleeve. She found the card in the inside left pocket. It was a small card, index card size, written in Jack's handwriting, which was large and slightly uneven, because he always said his hands were too big for precision work. 1 phone number, in 6 words. If it ever gets this bad, call. Emily stood in the closet doorway and read those words and felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not hope exactly. Something older than that, something more like recognition. Jack had known. Not that he would die. Nobody could know that. But Jack had known that the world was not always fair, and that systems did not always protect the people they were supposed to protect, and that Emily, for all her composure and her competence, and her stubborn refusal to ask for help, might someday be standing exactly where she was standing right now. And he had left her a number she almost did not call. That was the honest truth. She stood there for a full hour with the card in her hand and argued with herself about it. She did not know whose number it was. She did not know what calling it would set in motion. She had spent 19 days managing everything carefully and cleanly, and she was afraid that one phone call to an unknown number could change the shape of everything. She also had 30 days and $4,300 and a mortgage payment coming in 11 days. Emily walked to the kitchen table and sat down and dialed the number. It rang 4 times. Then a voice answered, deep and unhurried, the voice of a man who was accustomed to phone calls at unexpected hours. Yeah, I found this number in my husband's jacket. My name is Emily Whitmore. Jack Whitmore was my husband. A pause, short but complete. I know who Jack is. The past tense didn't come. Emily noticed that. He passed away 3 weeks ago. The silence on the other end was different this time. Heavier. Yeah, the voice said again, quieter now. I heard. I'm real sorry, Emily. The county is trying to take his pension, she said. She had not planned to say it that fast or that directly, but there it was. They sent me a letter saying his death was voluntary personal risk and that I don't qualify for survivor benefits. I have 30 days to appeal and I can't afford a lawyer, and I found his card and he said to call if it ever got this bad. The pause after that was the longest one yet. When the man spoke again, his voice had changed in a way she could not quite name. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning. Take your time." His name was Marcus Callahan. Most people called him Stone. He had been the president of the Red Valley chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club for 11 years. Before that, he had been a member for 14 years. Before that, he had been a Marine. Before that, he had grown up outside of Tucson in a neighborhood where learning to be hard was not a choice but a survival strategy. Marcus was 58 years old, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard he had been growing since his late 30s. He had a face that had lived through weather and years, and the kind of experiences that leave marks you cannot always see. His hands were rough in the way that hands get rough from actual work, not from decoration. He had known Jack Whitmore for 12 years. They had met at a roadside breakdown. Jack had been coming back from a highway inspection, and Marcus had been on the side of State Route 89 with a failed alternator and a cell phone with 2% battery. Jack had pulled over without being asked. He had stayed for 2 hours. He had followed Marcus to the nearest service station and made sure the bike was going to be okay before he drove away. Marcus had tried to pay him. Jack had refused. "Just return the favor someday when you can," Jack had said, and he had meant it as the ordinary thing people say when they do not want gratitude. But Marcus had not forgotten. Over the years, they had developed the kind of friendship that does not need constant maintenance. They did not see each other every week. They did not call on every birthday. But there was an understanding between them that ran underneath the surface of things, the understanding that if one of them was ever in real trouble, the other one would come. Marcus had not known about the pension letter until Emily called. He had known about the accident. Word had gotten around, as it always does in communities like his, through phone calls and text messages and the particular grapevine that connects people who operate outside the mainstream. He had known Jack was gone. He had sent flowers to the funeral home because he had not been in the state when it happened. He had not known about the letter. He listened to Emily for 45 minutes without interrupting. She told him about the pension office. She told him about the language in the letter, the voluntary personal risk clause, the 180-day appeal delay. She told him about the math she had done at the kitchen table. She told him about the mortgage and the savings and the 30-day window. She told him about the 2 county representatives who had come to her house 4 days after the letter arrived. This was the part that made Marcus go very still. "2 of them came to your house?" "Yes." "What did they want?" Emily set down the mug she had been holding. "They came to collect the service recognition medal, the one Jack received when he completed 15 years with the county. They said that since his benefits were being terminated, any items related to county service needed to be returned pending review." Marcus said nothing. "They took it off the wall," Emily said. "I let them because I didn't know I had the right to say no. I signed a receipt. They gave me a copy." "They took his medal off your wall?" "Yes." Marcus exhaled slowly. "They came to your house and took a dead man's medal off his widow's wall?" "Yes." Another long silence. "Okay," Marcus finally said, and the single word carried a weight that Emily could not entirely interpret yet. Not anger exactly, something more controlled than anger, something that had moved past anger and arrived at something colder and more purposeful. "What does okay mean?" Emily asked. "It means you are not handling this alone," Marcus said. "That's what it means." Emily felt something loosen slightly in her chest, just slightly, the way a fist unclenches one finger at a time. "Marcus, I'm not looking for anyone to do anything that causes problems. I needed to tell someone who would understand what this means. I understand exactly what this means. I don't want there to be any trouble." "There won't be trouble," Marcus said. "There's going to be a show." She did not entirely understand what he meant by that. She would understand it later. After she hung up the phone that night, Emily sat at the kitchen table for a while and looked at the card in her hand. The card with Jack's handwriting. The card that had sat in the inside pocket of his jacket for months, maybe longer, waiting for a day that Jack had hoped would never come. She wondered when he had written it. She wondered what he had been thinking when he wrote it. She wondered if he had known that calling that number would set something into motion that she could not yet imagine the shape of. She placed the card on the table next to the pension letter, two pieces of paper, one written by a bureaucracy that had decided Jack's life was worth nothing, one written by a man who had believed that no person should face the worst alone. Emily looked at both of them for a long time. Then she got up and went to bed. She did not sleep well. She had not slept well in 19 days. But somewhere around 3 in the morning, she woke up and lay in the dark and realized something had shifted. Not in the situation. The situation was exactly as difficult as it had been at midnight. But something inside her had shifted. Something small and critical, like a gear catching. She was not going to lose the house. She did not know how she knew that. She could not explain it rationally. But lying in the dark when in the house that smelled like Jack and coffee and the particular quiet of a desert night, Emily Whitmore felt something she had not felt since the morning the officer knocked on her door. She felt like she was not alone in this. The next morning she called into work. She told her manager Karen that she needed a few more days before she came back. Karen said, "Of course, take all the time you need. We miss you, but the front desk is covered. Do not worry about a single thing." Emily thanked her and hung up and went back to the kitchen table with her coffee and the pension letter and a notepad and started writing down everything she remembered about the day the county representatives had come to her house. Their names, what they said, the exact words they used, the time they arrived, the time they left. The receipt she had signed, the language on the receipt. She wrote 3 pages of notes. Then she made a second call. This one to her sister-in-law, Donna, who lived in Phoenix and had a brother who had gone to law school before he decided he liked running a restaurant better. "Does Derek still know any lawyers?" Emily asked. "He knows a bunch of them. Why? I need someone who understands pension law. Not to hire, just to talk to understand what my rights are before I do anything." Donna was quiet for a moment. "Emily, what is happening?" Emily told her. The silence on Donna's end was a different kind of silence than Marcus's had been. Marcus's silence had been strategic. Donna's silence was the sound of someone absorbing a blow. "They sent representatives to your house and took Jack's medal." "Yes." "Tell me you are joking." "I have the receipt." "Oh my God!" Donna's voice had dropped into a register that Emily recognized. That was Donna's serious register. Donna was dramatic by nature, given to sudden outbursts of laughter and strong opinions about minor things. But when she dropped into that quiet, low voice, it meant she had crossed from emotional into operational. "I will call Derek today. He will know someone. Emily, you should have called me the day the letter came." "I know. You cannot do everything alone." "I know. Jack would tell you the same thing." "I know." Emily's voice caught slightly on the last word. She pressed through it. "I'm figuring that out." She spent the rest of the morning on the notepad. She made a timeline of everything that had happened since the accident. The first phone call from the county, the letter, the 2 representatives. The receipt. She cross-referenced it against what she knew about the pension plan, which was not much because Jack had always handled those papers. She found his pension documentation in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the tan metal cabinet that Jack had called the fortress of relevant things because it contained their important documents, their insurance papers, the deed to the house, their wills. The pension agreement was 23 pages long. Emily sat on the floor of the spare bedroom and read all 23 pages. It took 2 hours. She found the clause the county was using to terminate her benefits. Section 14B, subsection 7. Paragraph 3, activities resulting from voluntary assumption of personal risk not related to covered employment duties are excluded from survivor benefit calculations. She read it 4 times. Then she read the definition of covered employment duties on page 7, and she found something. It was small, it was technical, it was exactly the kind of thing that gets buried on page 7 of a 23-page document that nobody ever reads until they desperately need to. County employees whose regular duties include highway safety inspection and hazard assessment are considered to be operating within covered employment parameters when acting to prevent or mitigate road-related hazards, including hazards to motorists in distress. Emily stared at that sentence for a very long time. Jack's official job title was Highway Infrastructure and Safety Inspector. His official duties included, and this was in his employment record, this was in the paperwork, hazard assessment and public safety response along designated county routes. Highway 60 was a county route. A family of four trapped in a flooding vehicle on a county route was by any reasonable reading a road-related hazard. Emily picked up her notepad and wrote down the page number and the exact language in the cross-reference to Jack's job description. Her handwriting was very steady. She surprised herself with that. She sat on the floor of the spare bedroom with the pension document across her knees and the notepad beside her, and she thought about the people at the pension office, the Richard Holloways of the world, the men who sat in offices with their names on nameplates and their photos on walls and made decisions about other people's lives without ever having to see the faces of the people they were deciding about. She thought about the letter, benefits terminated, 2 words. She thought about Jack's medal coming off the wall. Then she thought about the phone number on the card. And Marcus Callahan's voice saying there's going to be a show. She did not know yet exactly what that meant. But sitting on the floor of the spare bedroom of the house, her husband had worked 18 years to help pay for Emily Whitmore, decided that whatever Marcus was planning, she was going to be ready. She was not going to show up to the pension hearing as a widow with her hat in her hand. She was going to show up with documentation. She was going to show up with legal language. She was going to show up with Jack's 18-year employment record and his job description and his safety inspection reports and page 7 of the pension agreement highlighted in yellow. And if Marcus Callahan wanted to bring some people with him to make sure the parking lot was full, Emily was not going to stop him. She got up off the floor and put the pension document back on the filing cabinet and walked to the kitchen and poured a fresh cup of coffee. Then she sat down at the table and started writing her formal appeal. Word by word, line by line, the way Jack would have wanted her to, quietly, carefully, without flinching. Outside, the Arizona morning was already heating up into the kind of dry, relentless warmth that turns the air to something close to weight. The kind of morning that Jack used to complain about while secretly loving it because he said the desert heat was honest in a way that other weathers were not. It made no promises. It did not pretend to be comfortable. It just was what it was. Emily thought about that while she wrote. She thought about honesty, about what it cost, about who paid the price when a system decided that honesty was inconvenient. She wrote for 3 hours without stopping. When she was finished, she had 11 pages of formal appeal documentation cross-referenced and cited and organized with the kind of methodical care that came from 18 years of watching a very precise and particular man approach everything in his life with the belief that doing something right was worth the time it took. She stapled the pages together. She put them in a manila envelope. She wrote the address of the Maricopa County Pension Administration office on the front. Then she put the envelope on the counter next to the coffee maker where she would see it first thing in the morning. She was going to deliver it in person. Not mail it, deliver it. She was going to walk into that office and hand it to whoever was behind the desk and make sure they knew that Emily Whitmore was not a file number, and she was not a case ID, and she was not a widow who was going to quietly accept 2 words at the bottom of a government letter and disappear. She was going to make them look at her. That night, Marcus called back. He did not give her the full count. He did not use dramatic language. He just said in that same unhurried voice, "We're going to have some people at the hearing. I want to make sure you're okay with that before we commit to it." "How many people?" A brief pause. "Enough that they'll know we're serious." Emily thought about that. She thought about Richard Holloway and his nameplate and his photo on the wall, and his letter with its careful bureaucratic language designed to make a widow feel like a file number. She thought about the medal coming off the wall. "Will there be any trouble?" "Oh, no," Marcus said, and the single word was so flat and certain that she believed him entirely. "My guys know how to show up. They know the difference between making noise and making a point." "Okay," Emily said. "Okay." "Okay," she said again. "I'll see you at the hearing." She hung up the phone and sat at the kitchen table for 1 more minute and looked at the envelope on the counter and Jack's photograph on the wall. "I found your card," she said aloud to the photograph, to the empty house, to the folded flag. "I used it. I hope that's okay." The house was quiet around her, but it was a different kind of quiet than it had been for 19 days. Not the quiet of absence. Something closer to the quiet that comes before. Emily Whitmore went to bed. She slept better than she had in 3 weeks. The envelope hit the front desk of the Maricopa County Pension Administration office at 8:53 in the morning. Emily had driven 40 minutes to get there. She had dressed carefully, not formally, not in a way that was trying too hard, but in the way that says, I am a person who takes this seriously and you should too. Dark slacks, a gray blouse, her hair pulled back. The same shoes she had worn to Jack's funeral because they were the most serious shoes she owned, and this was a serious day. The woman behind the front desk was young, maybe 24, with the slightly glazed expression of someone who had been sorting papers since 8 and had already decided the day was going to be long. I need to file a formal appeal, Emily said. She placed the manila envelope on the counter. Case ID 77-4421-B Whitmore. The young woman looked at the envelope, then at Emily, then back at the envelope. You can mail these in, she said. I'm aware, Emily said pleasantly. I prefer to hand deliver. We'll send you a confirmation by mail within 10 business days. I'll need a dated receipt acknowledging delivery. Today's date, my name, the case ID. The young woman blinked. She was not used to this, Emily could tell. The people who came to this office were usually confused or frightened or both. They came with questions, not with 11-page appeals and requests for dated receipts. I'll need to get my supervisor, the young woman said. That's fine, Emily said. I'll wait. She waited 14 minutes. The supervisor was a man in his 40s named Gary, according to his lanyard, with the look of someone who had developed a very specific facial expression for dealing with difficult situations, a kind of flat professional neutrality that was designed to communicate nothing at all. Ms. Whitmore, Gary said. Mrs. Whitmore, Emily said. My husband passed away 22 days ago. His name was Jack Whitmore. He worked for this county for 18 years. I'm filing a formal appeal of the benefit termination letter dated, she checked the date she had written on the envelope, dated the 14th. Gary looked at the envelope. He took a slow breath. Mrs. Whitmore, I want you to understand that these decisions go through a formal review board and appeals are subject to standard processing timelines. I understand that completely, Emily said. I've read the full documentation. I've also cross-referenced Section 14B with my husband's official job description, which includes highway safety response as a covered employment duty. I've documented that in the appeal. She paused. I'd like my dated receipt, please. Gary looked at her for a moment with something behind his professional neutrality that she could not quite name. Not contempt, not sympathy. Something more like recalibration, the expression of a man who had just realized this particular widow was not going to be easy to process. He printed her a receipt. Emily folded it carefully and put it in her purse and said thank you, and walked back out into the Arizona heat. She sat in her car for a moment and let out a long, slow breath. Her hands were shaking. They had been shaking the whole time she was inside. She had not let it show. She had held the counter and spoken clearly and kept her voice even and given nothing away. But now alone in the car, she let her hands shake for a minute while she breathed. Then she picked up her phone and called Donna. I filed it, she said when Donna answered. How did it go? I got a receipt. Good. Derek's contact called me back. His name is Paul Mercer. He's a pension law attorney in Scottsdale. He said he'll do an initial consultation pro bono. Because, Donna paused, because he said what they did is, in his exact words, flagrantly inconsistent with standard survivor benefit statute. His words, not mine. Emily pressed her hand flat against the steering wheel. He said flagrantly inconsistent. He sounded pretty worked up about it for a lawyer, which I take as a good sign. Can I call him today? He's expecting you. Emily called Paul Mercer from the parking lot. He answered on the second ring with the quick clipped energy of someone who had been thinking about this since Donna's call. Paul Mercer was the kind of lawyer who had gone into pension law for the specific reason that it was unglamorous. He had told people this at parties for 20 years, and they always looked slightly confused by it. Pension law was the kind of specialty that did not produce television dramas or movie adaptations. It was the kind of law that existed in the gaps between things, in the space between what institutions said they would do and what they actually did. And Paul had spent 20 years in that gap, finding the cases where the gap was wide enough to drive a truck through. This one, he told Emily within 15 minutes of hearing the details, was one of the widest gaps he had seen in a long time. Walk me through the clause they used, what he said. Emily read it to him from her notes. Section 14B, subsection 7, paragraph 3. Voluntary assumption of personal risk not related to covered employment duties. Paul repeated back. And your husband's official job title, Highway Infrastructure and Safety Inspector. And his documented duties, hazard assessment and public safety response along designated county routes. A pause on Paul's end. Highway 60 is a county route. Yes. And the accident involved a vehicle in distress on that route during a flood event. Yes. Paul made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close to one. The sound of a man who had just seen the other side walk directly into a wall. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, the clause they use to terminate your benefits explicitly does not apply when the employee's covered duties include hazard response. Your husband's job description includes exactly that. Whoever reviewed this case either did not read his employment record or chose not to. Emily stared straight ahead through the windshield. Which one do you think it was? She asked. Another pause, more careful this time. I think, Paul said slowly, that someone made a decision quickly and expected it to stick. I think they saw a motorcycle club connection in his background, saw the survivor's address in a small town, and calculated that this particular widow was unlikely to fight back effectively. The words landed in Emily's chest with the clean precision of something that had always been true, but had not been said out loud before. They had looked at her and calculated that she would give up. They were wrong, Emily said. Yes, Paul said. They were. Now let me tell you what we're going to do. The appeal hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks was not 180 days. 3 weeks was the result of Paul Mercer calling the pension office's legal department directly and using a phrase that Emily would only hear about secondhand, but that Donna described as the kind of legal language that makes bureaucrats sit very straight in their chairs. Emily did not know exactly what Paul had said. She knew that Gary from the front desk had called her back within 2 hours of Paul's call to inform her that an expedited review had been scheduled and that the hearing date had been set for the 14th of the following month. 23 days. She had 23 days to prepare. She spent 3 of them with Paul Mercer going through documentation, Jack's employment records, his safety inspection reports, the accident report from Highway 60, witness statements from the first responders on the scene, a statement from Deputy Torres, the young officer who had told Emily in the hospital hallway that Jack had saved all 4 members of the Reyes family. On the 4th day, something happened that Emily had not expected. Maria Reyes called her. The call came at 6:47 in the evening. Emily was at the kitchen table going through papers when her phone rang with an unknown number. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice was soft and slightly accented, warm in the way that voices get warm when the person speaking is still carrying the weight of something enormous. My name is Maria Reyes. My family was in the accident on Highway 60. Emily set down her pen. Yes, she said quietly. I heard what the county is trying to do. A brief pause. I need you to know that we have been trying to find out how to reach you since we heard. My husband Carlos and I, we want to help. We want to do whatever we can. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Mrs. Reyes. Maria, please. Maria. Emily took a breath. Your family is okay, your children. Yes. Maria's voice tightened just slightly. Because of your husband. My daughter Sophia is 8. My son is 6. They are alive because a man they never met got out of his truck in a flood. A beat. I want to stand up in that hearing room and say that. I want them to hear it from me. I have a lawyer, Emily said. His name is Paul Mercer. Can I give him your number? Please, Maria said. Give him our number. Give him whatever you need. We will be there. Emily wrote the number on her notepad. After she hung up, she sat at the table for a while without moving. She had not expected that. She had been so focused on the legal architecture of the appeal, the clauses and the cross-references, and the documented job duties that she had almost forgotten the most basic thing. 4 people were alive because of Jack. 4 real people with names and children and voices who could stand in a room and say so. She called Paul and gave him Maria's number. Paul's voice, when she told him about the call, had a quality she had not heard in it before, that he said is going to matter. Meanwhile, on the other side of Red Valley, in the back room of a building on Oak Street that served as the local chapter's meeting space, Marcus Callahan was on the phone. He had been on the phone a lot in the past week. Not with angry people, not with people making plans for confrontation. Marcus had been a chapter president long enough to understand that the fastest way to destroy something legitimate was to attach it to something that looked like a threat. He had been around long enough to have watched that happen to other situations, other cases where a righteous cause got buried under the optics of the people fighting for it. He was not going to let that happen here. The calls he was making were to other chapter presidents, not just Arizona, Nevada, California, New Mexico, Utah, a network of people who knew each other through years of shared roads and shared values, and a shared understanding of what brotherhood actually meant when it was not being performed for an audience. The message was simple. Jack Whitmore's widow was having her benefits stripped. The county had taken his medal off her wall. There was a hearing in 23 days, and Marcus intended to make sure that hearing room was surrounded by the kind of presence that could not be ignored or minimized or dismissed. Not a protest, not a demonstration, a showing up. There was a difference, Marcus told people, and the difference mattered. A protest made noise. A demonstration made demands. What he was planning was something older than either of those things. He was planning a vigil, a standing presence, the kind of thing that says we see what you are doing and we are witnesses and our witnessing matters. How many, asked Danny Flores, the chapter president from Las Vegas, who had ridden with Jack once at an event in Flagstaff 6 years ago and remembered him as the man who spent his break helping a 16-year-old kid retape his handlebars. As many as want to come, Marcus said. Give me a number to plan for. Marcus thought about it. He had been making calls for 5 days. He had a rough count. 300 confirmed, he said. Maybe more. Could be closer to 500-600 if the weather holds. Danny was quiet for a moment. They're going to look at that and see a threat, he said. Not critically, just observationally. Only if we give them a reason to, Marcus said. No colors displayed aggressively. No intimidation. Nobody approaches the building unless they are specifically invited. Engines off when we arrive. We park and we stand and we are quiet. Silent. Respectful, Marcus said. There's a difference. He heard Danny exhale slowly on the other end. Jack was a good guy, Danny said. Yeah, Marcus said. He was, so we're going to act like it. The first thing Richard Holloway heard about the upcoming hearing was from his assistant, who came into his office on a Tuesday morning with a slightly unusual expression and told him that the Whitmore appeal had been expedited and scheduled for the 14th. Holloway was the chairman of the Maricopa County Pension Review Board. He had held the position for 7 years. He was a compact man in his late 50s with the kind of careful personal presentation that comes from decades of operating in political environments where appearance is a form of communication. He kept his desk clean. He dressed consistently. He was rarely surprised. He was slightly surprised by this. Expedited on whose authority, he asked. His assistant explained about the attorney, about Paul Mercer, about the phrase that had been used in the call to the legal department. Holloway leaned back in his chair. He remembered the Whitmore case. He had signed off on the termination himself, which was unusual. Normally, terminations at that level were handled by his deputy. But this one had come to his desk specifically because of the circumstances. The motorcycle club connection in Whitmore's background, the nature of the death, the optics of a county employee with Hell's Angels ties dying in a flooding roadway. He had made a judgment call. He had decided quickly and without extensive review that the voluntary personal risk clause applied and that the benefits should be terminated before the case attracted any public attention that might be uncomfortable to manage. He had been wrong about the public attention part. The attorney call was one thing. The second thing came from his deputy, who came to his office on Thursday with a different expression. Not unusual. Worried. There are posts online, his deputy said, about the Whitmore case, about the hearing. Holloway looked up. What kind of posts? Motorcycle community forums, some Facebook groups. People are saying there's going to be a large gathering at the hearing. Supporters of the widow. Holloway said nothing. How large? He asked after a moment. His deputy checked his phone. The posts I'm seeing are saying several hundred. Some are saying more. Several hundred. Holloway kept his face neutral. The hearing is a formal county proceeding, he said. It is not a public event. Members of the public are not permitted inside the hearing room. They won't be inside, his deputy said. They'll be outside. Holloway stared at his deputy for a moment. Get me the full file on Whitmore, he said. Everything, employment records, the original termination review, all of it. Yes, sir. And get me our legal department on the phone. His deputy left. Holloway sat alone in his office for a moment. He was not a man who second-guessed himself easily. He had not built a 7-year tenure on the pension board by being the kind of person who reversed decisions the moment someone pushed back. Reversals were signs of weakness. Reversals invited future challenges from anyone who thought that persistence was enough to change a determination. But several hundred people outside the hearing room was a specific kind of pressure that was distinct from a widow's attorney filing paperwork. He picked up the phone and called his deputy back before his deputy had even made it to the door. Get me everything we have on the Whitmore employment record, he said, specifically his job description, specifically what it says about his covered duties. A pause on the other end. Is there something specific you're looking for? His deputy asked carefully. Just get me the file, Holloway said. He read it that afternoon. He read it twice. He sat with it for a long time. And somewhere in the second careful reading of page 7 of Jack Whitmore's 18-year employment record, Richard Holloway felt something he did not experience frequently. He felt the specific discomfort of a man who had made a decision too fast. He did not call anyone about this feeling. He did not share it with his deputy or his legal department or anyone else. He put the file in his desk drawer and went to a meeting and came back and looked at the drawer and did not open it. What he did instead over the next several days was what people in positions like his often do so when they realize a decision might be wrong but do not want to admit it directly. He began to quietly look for reasons the decision had still been correct. He began to reread the voluntary personal risk clause with more force, as if reading it more assertively would make it more applicable. He began to ask his legal team questions about the precedent for the clause in similar cases, hoping they would come back with something that would give him solid ground to stand on. They came back with 4 cases. In 2 of them, the clause had been applied correctly to situations that were genuinely personal, not work-related. In 1 of them, the court had overturned the application on appeal. In the 4th one, the city involved had settled out of court for twice the original benefit amount. Holloway's legal team delivered this information in writing. The memo landed on his desk on a Monday morning, and he read it and set it down and stared at the clean surface of his desk for a while. The hearing was in 11 days. Marcus Callahan heard about the online post from his nephew, who was 17, and spent a concerning amount of time on various platforms and considered himself something of an informal communications manager for the chapter's community reputation. It's getting big, his nephew told him over the phone. Like bigger than you probably planned for. Define bigger. There's a Facebook group. It's called Ride for Emily Whitmore. It has 11,000 members. Marcus was quiet for a moment. 11,000. As of this morning, it had 4,000 3 days ago. Marcus sat with that number. He had not created the Facebook group. He did not know who had. Someone had taken the information about the hearing and the story of what had happened to Emily, the pension termination, the metal removed from the wall, the widow alone with a 30-day deadline, and put it somewhere visible. And the visible thing had connected with something in people that Marcus recognized because it was the same thing that had made him pick up the phone after Emily called. It was the specific outrage of watching something unfair happen to someone who did not deserve it. It was the particular anger that comes from recognizing a system making a calculation that a person without power is not worth the effort of doing right by. People felt that. Regular people. People who were not motorcycle club members and had never met Jack Whitmore and lived nowhere near Red Valley. People who had their own versions of this story, their own letters, their own moments of standing in a kitchen holding a piece of paper that said the institution they had trusted had decided they were not worth protecting. They were not coming to Red Valley. Most of them were not, but they were watching. And the watching mattered in ways Marcus understood, even if he could not have articulated exactly why. He called Emily. There's a Facebook group, he said. I know, Emily said. Maria Reyes sent me the link. 11,000 members. A pause. I know, Emily said again. Her voice was quieter than he expected. You okay? Another pause, longer. I don't know how to feel about it, she said honestly. I'm grateful. I'm a private person, Marcus. Jack was a private person. We were not people who wanted this kind of attention. I know. But I also think about the metal coming off the wall, Emily said, and her voice had changed slightly, quieter but harder. I think about that every day. Some man standing in my house holding a receipt for me to sign for my dead husband's service medal. And I think about every other widow who got a letter like mine and didn't have a card in a jacket pocket with a phone number on it, who didn't know anyone to call, who just signed the receipt and sat down and tried to figure out how to survive the math. Marcus said nothing. He let her have the silence. So yeah, Emily said, 11,000 people. Okay, I hope it's enough. It's going to be more than that, Marcus said. He told her the count, the confirmed writers, the people who had reached out, the chapters who had committed to being there. Emily was quiet for a long time after that. Marcus, she said finally. Yeah. Jack would be so embarrassed. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Something close to a laugh, but not quite. The kind of thing that happens when grief and warmth occupy the same space at the same moment. Yeah, he said. He would be absolutely mortified. He hated attention. He did. Terrible quality for a man worth paying attention to. Emily made a sound that was almost a laugh. It was the first time Marcus had heard anything close to a laugh from her. We're going to be there, Marcus said. Every single one of us. And we're going to stand outside that building so quiet and so solid that they will have no choice but to deal with what's actually true, which is that Jack Whitmore spent his life doing the right thing, and the county he worked for 18 years does not get to just quietly decide that his life was not worth honoring. Okay, Emily said. Okay. Okay, she said again. And then tell your people that I'm grateful. Tell them that Jack would have done the same for any of them, because he would have. That's just who he was. I know, Marcus said. He did know. That was the thing about Jack that Marcus had understood from the first time they met on the side of Route 89 with a failed alternator and 2% battery. Jack Whitmore was not complicated. He was not performing a particular version of himself for any audience. He pulled over because someone needed help, and he had the ability to help. And in Jack's world, those two facts were sufficient. They were the whole equation. The world was worse at math than Jack Whitmore. On the 6th day before the hearing, a retired county pension investigator named Gerald Pruitt read the Facebook group post that someone had shared to a neighborhood forum he followed out of mild curiosity about local affairs. Gerald Pruitt was 61 years old and had worked for the county pension office for 22 years before retiring. He had spent 22 years reviewing cases. He had spent 22 years watching the gap between what the rules said and what the people running the rules chose to do with them. He had retired quietly. He had not made a fuss. He had taken his own pension and his 30-year marriage and his woodworking hobby and his 2 German shepherds and left the county office behind without looking back. He had spent 2 years not looking back. Then he read the Facebook post about Emily Whitmore and the termination letter and the metal coming off the wall, and he sat at his kitchen table for a long time, and then he did something he had not expected to do. He called his old work phone directory and found a number he had not dialed in 2 years. Not a number for the pension office, a number for a former colleague who had left the office under different circumstances than Gerald. A colleague who had raised concerns quietly and through proper channels about a pattern she had observed in certain termination decisions during the past several years. A pattern that seemed to cluster around specific categories of cases. Cases involving claimants who were perceived as unlikely to appeal effectively. His former colleague's name was Sandra. She answered on the 3rd ring. You saw it too, she said before he could even say hello. I saw it, Gerald said. I've been thinking about making a call, Sandra said. I've been thinking about it for 2 days. Mana, who would you call? A pause. The attorney, Sandra said, the one listed in the post. Paul Mercer. Gerald was quiet for a moment. If you do that, he said carefully, you know what it opens. I know what it opens, Sandra said, and her voice was the voice of someone who had been sitting with a decision for 2 years and had just decided. I also know what staying quiet closed. I watched them do this, Gerald. Not just to this woman. I watched them do this to a 63-year-old man in Chandler who had worked sanitation for 20 years. I watched them do it to a teacher's aide in Mesa. I raised it internally and nothing happened. And I left and I stayed quiet and I have been... She stopped. I've been quiet long enough. Gerald exhaled slowly. He said. Okay. Call the attorney, Gerald said, and give him my number too, because I think I remember some things about that period that might be worth saying out loud. Paul Mercer received Sandra's call on a Wednesday afternoon. He listened for 40 minutes. When she was done, he sat at his desk for a very long time without saying anything. Then he asked her one question. Would you be willing to testify at the hearing? Sandra said yes. Paul called Emily that evening. Something happened today, he said. When he was finished explaining, Emily was silent for so long that Paul asked if she was still there. I'm here, she said. This changes the nature of the hearing significantly, Paul said. We came in with a solid argument about covered employment duties. That argument is still sound, and I believe we would have won on those grounds alone. But what Sandra is prepared to say, he paused. Emily, if what she's describing is accurate, the Whitmore case is not an isolated administrative error. It's part of a pattern, and a hearing about a pattern is a very different thing than a hearing about one case. Emily was quiet again. When she spoke, her voice was very even. How many other families? She asked. Paul hesitated. Sandra mentioned at least 4 other cases she personally observed, he said carefully. There may be more. That's not something I can determine before the hearing, but 4 other families, Emily said. Yes, 4 other families who got a letter like mine. Potentially more. Emily pressed her hand flat on the kitchen table. Okay, she said. Okay, what do we need to do? Keep preparing, Paul said. Bring everything we have, and let me work with Sandra and Gerald on what they're prepared to say. The hearing is in 6 days. 6 days, Emily said. Are you ready? Emily looked at the wall where Jack's photograph hung. She looked at the empty space where the medal used to be. She looked at the pension letter still on the counter and the dated receipt folded next to it and the notepad covered in her steady, careful handwriting. I've been ready, she said. I've been ready since the day they knocked on my door. 6 days. In 6 days, 750 riders from across 4 states would park their motorcycles along the streets of Red Valley and remove their helmets and stand in complete silence, while a 40-minute drive away inside City Hall, a widow who had spent her career at a dental office front desk walked into a hearing room with 11 pages of documentation, a pension law attorney, 2 former county employees willing to testify about a pattern of abuse, and the testimony of a woman named Maria Reyes whose 8-year-old daughter was alive because of the man whose legacy this board had decided to erase. Richard Holloway did not know about Sandra. He did not know about Gerald Pruitt. He did not know about Maria Reyes's phone call. He was about to. And in 6 days, when he walked into that hearing room, expecting a procedural formality that would confirm a decision he had already made, he was going to discover something that no amount of desk tidying or political calculation had prepared him for. He was going to discover that Jack Whitmore, a man he had never met, had spent his whole life quietly making the kind of investments that do not show up on balance sheets, the kind that come due all at once. The night before the hearing, Emily did not sleep at all. She did not fight it. She had learned in the past 4 weeks that fighting sleeplessness was its own kind of exhaustion, lying in the dark, arguing with your own mind, while your body went rigid with the effort of trying to force rest that was not going to come. So instead, she got up at 2 a.m. and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Jack's employment file and her notepad and went through everything one more time. Not because she did not know it. She knew it. She had it memorized in the way you memorize things that matter, not through deliberate drilling, but through the accumulated weight of reading and rereading until the words become part of the architecture of your thinking. She could have recited Section 14B and Jack's job description and the accident report details in her sleep. She probably had on the nights when sleep came in broken pieces. She went through it again because going through it was the only thing she could do at 2 a.m. that felt like moving forward instead of just waiting. Paul had called at 9 the previous evening to go through the order of presentation one final time. His voice had that particular quality she had come to recognize over the past 3 weeks, the quality of someone operating at full capacity who was choosing to sound calm because calm was contagious in the right direction and panic was contagious in the wrong one. Walk me through your concerns, he said. I don't have concerns, Emily said. I have facts. A brief pause on Paul's end. Then, good, hold on to that. What's Holloway going to argue? Holloway's legal team filed a supplementary brief this afternoon, Paul said. They're doubling down on the voluntary personal risk clause. They've pulled 2 precedent cases. Neither of them is particularly applicable to Jack's situation, but they're hoping the board reads quickly. Do they know about Sandra? They know a former employee is testifying. They don't know the full scope of what she's prepared to say. Emily processed that. And the Reyes family? Maria and Carlos will be in the room, Paul said. I've spoken with Maria twice today. She is very prepared. She is also Emily. She is angry in the quiet way that reads very well in a formal setting. The kind of anger that doesn't perform. It just sits there and makes everyone uncomfortable in exactly the right way. Emily understood that kind of anger. She had been living inside it for 4 weeks. What time should I be there? 8:30, Paul said. Hearing starts at 9. I want to settle before Holloway's team arrives. After she hung up, Emily had tried to sleep. She had lain in the dark for 40 minutes and then given up and gotten up and made the coffee and gone through the files, and now it was 3:45 in the morning, and the house was very quiet around her, and she was thinking about Jack. Not in the desperate way she had thought about him in the first days, not in the way where every thought of him felt like a wound. She was thinking about him the way you think about someone when you have been fighting for them long enough that the grief has shifted into something that has more structure to it, something that is still grief but has found a shape it can hold. She was thinking about a Tuesday evening, about 8 months before he died, when they had been sitting at the same kitchen table after dinner, and Jack had been talking about a younger writer in his chapter, a kid named Travis who had gotten himself into a difficult situation with a landlord and did not know how to navigate the formal complaint process. Jack had helped Travis write the letter to the housing board. He had spent 2 evenings on it. He had been meticulous about it, looking up the relevant ease and the proper citation format and the specific language that formal complaints needed to use to be taken seriously. Emily had asked him why he was putting so much effort into it. Because Travis doesn't know how these systems work, Jack had said, and the people running the systems know that Travis doesn't know, and they're counting on it. Emily had said something like, that's a lot of Tuesday evenings for someone else's housing complaint. And Jack had looked at her with that particular expression he had, the one that was not quite a smile but had the warmth of one, and said, what else would I do with a Tuesday evening? She thought about that now. She thought about all of Jack's Tuesday evenings that she had not known about. All the people he had quietly helped with all the things that did not make it into conversations over dinner because Jack did not narrate his own kindness. She thought about the fact that 4 weeks ago, she had not known that a man named Danny Flores in Las Vegas remembered Jack for helping a teenager retape his handlebars at an event in Flagstaff. She had not known because Jack had not told her. He had not told her because, for Jack, that kind of thing did not require telling. It just required doing. Emily closed the file and sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed for a while. Then she got up and went to get dressed. She was not going to be late. The first motorcycle arrived in Red Valley at 6:15 in the morning. It was Danny Flores himself riding alone from Las Vegas, who had left at 3 in the morning to make sure he was there before anyone else. He parked on the street 2 blocks from City Hall and cut his engine and sat for a moment in the early morning quiet. By 7, there were 40 bikes parked along that block. By 7:30, the number had tripled. They came from Nevada and California and New Mexico, and from towns across Arizona, whose names appeared on highway signs that Jack Whitmore had driven past for 18 years. They came on roads that Jack had inspected and documented and reported on. They came the way people come when the thing that calls them is not obligation, but something older and more solid than obligation. Marcus arrived at 6:50 with the core of the Red Valley chapter. He parked and cut his engine and stood and looked at the bikes already lining the street and felt something move through him that he did not try to name. His phone was buzzing continuously. Riders checking in, riders asking where to park, riders coming in from the highway asking for directions. He answered each one with the same information: park on the designated street engines off of helmets in hand, stay behind the sidewalk line. No one approaches the building entrance. No one raises their voice. By 8 o'clock, there were more than 300 bikes parked along the streets surrounding City Hall. By 8:30, the number was climbing toward 500, and they were silent. That was the thing that the people driving past on their way to work kept slowing down to process, not the motorcycles. Motorcycles were not unusual. It was the silence. It was the particular quality of several hundred people in leather vests standing quietly on a sidewalk in the early Arizona morning without making a sound. No music, No chanting, no one on a bullhorn, just people standing helmets in their hands. A woman driving a minivan to drop her kids at school pulled over and then rolled down her window. "What's happening?" she asked one of the riders nearest to the curb. The rider, a 40-year-old man from Albuquerque named Carl, who had never met Jack Whitmore, but had ridden with people who had looked at her and said simply, "A man died saving a family. The county is trying to take his pension away from his wife. We're here to make sure they know people are watching." The woman stared at him for a moment. Then she pulled out her phone. She took a photo of the street lined with motorcycles and the silent riders with their helmets in their hands. She posted it at 8:22 in the morning. By 9 o'clock, it had been shared 4,700 times. Emily arrived at 8:27. Paul Mercer was already there, standing near the entrance to City Hall with his briefcase and a coffee that he handed to her without asking, because he had learned over 3 weeks of working with Emily Whitmore that coffee was a language she spoke fluently. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm here," she said. That's the right answer. She looked at the street, at the motorcycles, at the riders standing in the quiet morning with their helmets in their hands. She looked for a long time without saying anything. Then she saw Marcus. He was standing at the edge of the group nearest to the building, not positioned as a leader exactly, but positioned the way a person positions themselves when they are the point of coordination for something large. He saw her at the same moment she saw him. He crossed the sidewalk toward her, and when he got close enough, she could see that he was wearing a clean vest and his best riding boots, and had made some effort with his gray-streaked beard that she suspected was more effort than he normally made. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready since they knocked on my door," she said. Marcus looked at her for a moment, that direct, unhurried look. "Jack knew what he had," he said quietly. Emily held that for a second. "Go stand with your people," she said. "I'll handle the inside." She turned and walked into the building with Paul at her side. The hearing room was on the second floor. It was a medium-sized room with a long table at the front where the board members would sit in rows of chairs facing it. There was a smaller table on the left side of the room for presenting parties and a microphone stand near the center for testimony. Emily and Paul took their seats at the presenting table. Paul opened his briefcase and arranged his documents with the quiet efficiency of someone who had done this many times. Emily set her own folder on the table in front of her and put her hands in her lap and breathed. Sandra came in at 8:40 and took a seat in the first row of chairs. She was a small woman in her late 50s with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses on a lanyard, in the particular erect posture of someone who has made a decision and is done second-guessing it. She caught Emily's eye when she sat down and gave a small nod. Emily nodded back. Gerald Pruitt came in 2 minutes later and sat beside Sandra. He was taller than Emily had expected from their brief phone call, a large, quiet man who moved carefully the way large, quiet men sometimes do. He nodded to Sandra. He nodded to Emily. He folded his hands on his knees and looked at the front of the room. Maria and Carlos Reyes came in at 8:52. Maria was carrying a folder of her own. Carlos was holding their daughter Sophia's hand. Sophia was 8 years old and very small, and had her father's dark eyes and was looking around the room with the wide-eyed attentiveness of a child who understood that something important was happening without knowing all the reasons why. Emily stood when she saw them. Maria crossed the room and took Emily's hands in both of hers. She did not say anything for a moment. She just held Emily's hands and looked at her, and the look communicated something that did not need words, the specific language of two people connected by a loss that one of them had lived and the other had survived. "Thank you for coming," Emily said. "We would not be anywhere else," Maria said. Carlos shook Emily's hand. His grip was firm, and his eyes were direct. "He saved my family," Carlos said. "Whatever we can do." Sophia looked up at Emily. "My mom says your husband was very brave," she said. Emily crouched down to be at Sophia's level. Emily said, "He was very brave and very kind. He would have been happy to know you're here." Sophia considered this with the serious thoughtfulness of an 8-year-old processing something large. "I made him a card," Sophia said. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket. "Mom said I could give it to you." Emily took the card. She did not open it right then. She held it carefully in both hands and said thank you in a voice that was very controlled and very even. And then she stood up and turned back toward the table before her face could do something she did not want it to do in front of a room full of people. The board members filed in at 8:58. There were 5 of them. Emily knew their names from the documentation Paul had provided. 3 were career bureaucrats she had no strong impressions of. One was a woman named Dr. Patricia Walsh, who had a background in labor law and whom Paul had mentioned as likely to be the most legally rigorous reader of the evidence. And then there was Richard Holloway, who came in last and took his seat at the center of the long table and arranged his papers and looked up and surveyed the room. His eyes moved across the presenting table, past Paul, to Emily, and stayed there for 1 second longer than a purely procedural survey would require. Emily met his gaze directly and did not look away. Holloway looked down at his papers. His legal team was at a second table on the right side of the room. 2 attorneys Emily did not know, and a deputy from the pension office whose name she had seen on some of the correspondence. They had a substantial amount of paper in front of them. At 9 o'clock exactly, Holloway called the hearing to order. He had a practiced, formal voice for this, the voice of someone who had run a lot of hearings. Clear, measured, impersonal. He stated the case ID. He stated the nature of the appeal. He summarized the board's original determination. Then he said, "Mrs. Whitmore, as the appealing party, you may present your case." Paul stood. He did not begin with pleasantries. He did not begin with an extended statement of purpose. He had told Emily that the worst thing you could do in a room like this was give people a reason to stop listening before you got to the part that mattered. He began with the language. He read Section 14B. He read Jack's job description. He cited page 7 of the pension agreement. He placed all 3 documents side by side in the logical sequence that made the conclusion inescapable. Jack Whitmore's covered employment duties included hazard response on county routes. Highway 60 was a county route. A vehicle in distress in a flood event on a county route was a road-related hazard. Jack's actions fell within the precise definition of covered activity. It took Paul 11 minutes to make this argument. It was 11 of the most precise minutes Emily had ever witnessed. When he sat down, the room was quiet. Holloway's lead attorney, a man named Brennan, stood to respond. He began with the 2 precedent cases. He was good at his job. Emily could see that. He was making the cases sound more applicable than they were, using confident language and a fast pace that was designed to create an impression of inevitability. He talked about the spirit of the clause and the board's interpretive authority and the distinction between employment duties and personal action in the field. Emily watched the board members while Brennan talked. Dr. Walsh was writing notes rapidly. 2 of the other board members were listening with the neutral expressions of people who had not yet decided. The third was leaning slightly toward Brennan, which Emily noted without panicking about it. Then Paul stood for his response. He addressed each of Brennan's precedent cases in order. He cited the distinctions. He cited the overturned case. He cited the settlement case. He read the relevant differences clearly and without apparent emotion, just language and logic stacked in an order that made Brennan's argument look like what it was a reach. Dr. Walsh stopped writing notes and looked up. That was the first moment Emily felt something shift in the room. It was subtle. It was the kind of shift you could only feel if you were paying close enough attention to everything at once, which Emily had been doing since she sat down. Dr. Walsh put down her pen and sat back slightly and looked at Paul with the expression of someone who had just confirmed something she had suspected. Then Paul said, "I'd like to call our first witness." He called Maria Reyes. Maria walked to the microphone stand in the center of the room and stood with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at the board members with those quiet dark eyes and that anger that did not perform. Holloway said, "Please state your name and your relationship to this case." "My name is Maria Reyes," Maria said. Her voice was clear and steady. "My family was in the minivan on Highway 60 on the afternoon of October 9th. My husband, Carlos, my daughter, Sophia, who is 8, my son, Marco, who is 6. We were trapped in the vehicle after it overturned. The water was rising. My son was unconscious. My daughter was screaming." She paused. "Jack Whitmore pulled us out. He pulled out my husband first, then my daughter, then me, then went back for Marco. The water was at door level when he went back for Marco." Another pause, this one deliberate. "All 4 of us are alive. Jack Whitmore is not. And I am standing in this room because the county that employed him for 18 years is attempting to characterize the act of saving my children as a reckless personal choice." The room was completely silent. Holloway said nothing. Brennan was looking at his papers. Dr. Walsh was looking at Maria with an expression that was no longer professionally neutral. Maria turned her gaze directly to Holloway. "I would like to ask this board," she said, "what the word reckless means. Because in my understanding, reckless means doing something dangerous without thought for the consequences. Jack Whitmore thought about the consequences. He chose them deliberately. He chose my children over his own life. She stopped. That is not reckless. That is the definition of the opposite of reckless. And I think everyone in this room knows that. She walked back to her seat. Sophia watched her mother come back and reached out and took her hand without being asked. Paul called Sandra next. Sandra walked to the microphone with the posture of someone who had been waiting 2 years to stand in exactly this spot. She stated her name. She stated her 22 years with the county pension office. She stated that she had left voluntarily 18 months ago. Then she began to speak about what she had observed. She was specific. She named dates. She cited case ID numbers she had memorized because she had spent 2 years trying not to think about them and had therefore not been able to stop. She described the pattern she had identified, a cluster of termination decisions during a specific 18-month period, and all of them applying the voluntary personal risk clause. All of them concentrated on cases involving claimants who had been assessed as unlikely to appeal effectively. She said the word assessed. She said it clearly and without flinching. The room had a different quality of silence now. Not the silence of people listening politely. The silence of people who have just heard something that requires them to reorganize their understanding of what they thought this hearing was about. Brennan stood. I'd like to object to the relevance of this testimony to the current case. Dr. Walsh looked at him. Overruled, she said, and her voice had the quality of someone who had the authority to say that and knew it. Brennan sat down. Sandra continued. She named 4 cases, 4 families. She described each termination in the same structural terms as Jack's, the rapid decision the clause applied without thorough review of employment documentation, the expectation that the claimant would not have the resources to challenge it. She looked at Holloway when she said the word expectation. Holloway was writing something on his notepad. His pen was moving steadily and his face was professionally composed. But Emily, who was watching him carefully, noticed that his writing had stopped being actual writing somewhere in the middle of Sandra's testimony. He was drawing lines. His pen was just moving. He was not processing the testimony. He was surviving it. Paul called Gerald Pruitt last. Gerald took the microphone with the deliberate movements of a large man being careful about the space he occupied. He stated his name, his 22 years, his specialization in case review auditing. Then he said something that no one in the room except Paul had known he was going to say. During my final year with the pension office, Gerald said I conducted an internal audit of benefit terminations for fiscal year 2021 through 2023. I flagged 11 cases as potentially inconsistent with statute. I submitted my findings to the office director. He paused. I was told the cases had been reviewed and the determinations were sound. Another pause. I believe that. I should not have believed that. The Whitmore case is one of the 11 cases I flagged. The room absorbed that. 11 cases. Gerald reached into the folder he was carrying and produced a document. This is a copy of my original audit report, he said, dated January 2023. I kept a personal copy. He looked at Holloway. I'd like to submit it as evidence. Holloway looked at the document. His face was still composed, but his pen had stopped moving entirely. Brennan leaned over and said something quietly to his colleague. His colleague wrote something quickly and slid it across the table. Brennan read it. His expression did not change, but something around his eyes tightened by a degree that Emily clocked from 15 feet away. Paul accepted the document from Gerald and submitted it formally to the board. Dr. Walsh received it and began reading immediately. She read quickly, her eyes moving across the page with the speed of someone who processed legal language, the way other people process spoken conversation. The hearing was supposed to be 2 hours. It went to 3.5. Holloway called 2 recesses. The first recess happened 40 minutes into the hearing after Gerald's testimony and lasted 20 minutes. Emily and Paul stepped into the hallway and Paul said quietly, "We have them." "You're sure?" Gerald's audit report names this case specifically. The board now has a document produced by their own former auditor indicating this termination was flagged 18 months ago as potentially improper. They cannot ignore that. "What about Holloway?" Paul looked at her carefully. "Holloway signed the original termination," he said. "That's a problem for Holloway that is separate from the problem of your benefits being restored." Emily absorbed that. "What kind of separate problem?" "The kind that tends to develop its own timeline," Paul said. The second recess happened at the beginning of the third hour after Brennan delivered his closing argument, which had become significantly shorter and significantly less confident than his opening argument had been. He was still arguing the spirit of the clause and the board's interpretive authority, but the argument had lost its fast pace and its impression of inevitability. It sounded like what it now was, a position being held out of necessity rather than conviction. During the second recess, Emily walked to the window at the end of the hallway and looked out at the street. 750 motorcycles. She had not been able to count them before. She could count them now from the window. Row after row of bikes lining the street, and between and around them, hundreds of people standing in the Arizona mid-morning heat with their helmets in their hands. Silent. Not performing silence, just being it. The way people are silent at grave sites, not because they have been told to be quiet, but because the weight of the moment is sufficient to hold language still. A young woman in street clothes was standing near the edge of the group with a cell phone clearly filming. A news van was parked down the block. Emily could see the logo on the side but could not read it from this distance. Marcus was visible from where she stood, standing with a group near the front. He was not looking at the building. He was talking to someone beside him, a quiet conversation unhurried. Emily pressed her hand against the glass. She did not know if he could see her. She thought probably not. She stayed at the window for a moment longer, looking at the riders, looking at the street lined with motorcycles, 750 of them, all of them quiet in the bright Arizona morning. And she thought about Jack, who had hated attention, who would have been absolutely mortified, who had spent his whole life doing things without witnesses and had somehow ended up with 750 of them. She thought about Tuesday evenings. She thought about the card in the jacket pocket. Then Paul was at her elbow. "They're reconvening," he said. She turned away from the window and walked back down the hallway toward the hearing room. In the time she had been standing at the window, Richard Holloway had made a phone call. She would find this out later from a source she did not expect. He had called the county administrator's office. He had spoken to someone above his own pay grade, which was not something he did frequently or lightly. He had described the situation. He had said the words audit report in 11 cases and former employee testimony, and the voice on the other end of that phone had gone quiet in the way that voices go quiet when they are doing rapid damage calculations. "What is your recommendation?" the voice had asked him. Holloway had looked at the window of his office, which faced the street. 750 motorcycles. "My recommendation," Holloway said, "is that we resolve this before we leave the room today." The voice on the other end was quiet for another moment. "Agreed," it said. The board reconvened. Holloway called the session back to order. His lead attorney, Brennan, did not stand. Holloway addressed the room directly. "The board has completed its review of all submitted evidence," he said. His voice was still measured, still formal, but something underneath the formality had changed. The practiced smoothness had developed the faintest unevenness, the way a road develops, a crack so fine you can barely see it but can absolutely feel it. "The board finds that the original termination determination in case ID 7-4421-B did not adequately account for the claimant's employment documentation, specifically the covered duties provisions outlined in his employment agreement." He paused. Emily was looking directly at him. He was not looking at her. "The board votes to reverse the benefit termination in full. All survivor benefits for Mrs. Emily Whitmore are hereby reinstated effective immediately. All previously withheld amounts will be returned within 14 business days. The official case record will be amended to correctly reflect the circumstances of John R. Whitmore's death." He paused again. He looked down at his papers. "Additionally," he said, "in light of testimony presented today, the board is referring the internal audit report submitted by Mr. Gerald Pruitt to the county administrator's office for independent review." That last sentence landed in the room like something dropped from a height. Brennan had gone very still at his table. Dr. Walsh was writing rapidly again. Emily sat with her hands in her lap and her breathing very controlled and her face giving absolutely nothing away. Paul reached over and placed his hand briefly on the table beside hers. Not touching, just there. She looked at him. He gave a small nod. Holloway concluded the hearing with procedural language about timelines and documentation that Emily did not fully process because she was having a very specific physical experience in that moment. Her hands, which had been steady all morning, had started to shake again. Not dramatically. just the fine tremor of a body that has been holding enormous tension for 4 weeks and has just been told it is allowed to release some of it. She pressed her hands flat on the table. She breathed. She looked at Maria Reyes in the front row. Maria was looking back at her. Maria's eyes were bright in a way that was not quite crying but was adjacent to it. Sophia, sitting beside her mother, caught Emily's eye and gave a small, serious wave. Emily almost lost it completely at the small, serious wave. She held on. The session was adjourned. The room broke into movement. Paul was gathering documents. Brennan's team was conferring quietly and quickly. Gerald and Sandra were standing and looking at each other with the particular expression of people who have just done something they cannot take back and have decided they are glad about it. Emily stood up. She stood up from this table in the hearing room of the Maricopa County Pension Administration building, and she picked up her folder and Jack's employment file and the folded card that Sophia Reyes had given her, and she walked toward the door. People stepped aside for her. She pushed open the door. She walked down the hall. She walked down the stairs. She pushed open the ground floor door of City Hall and stepped out into the Arizona mid-morning, and the heat hit her like a wall, and she stopped on the top step and looked at the street. 750 people looked back at her. Silence. And then Marcus Callahan, who had been watching the door since 8:30 in the morning, saw her face. He saw what her face said, even though she was not saying anything at all. He raised his right hand, and every single rider around him, in a wave that moved outward like a ripple from where Marcus stood, raised their helmets above their heads. 750 helmets raised in the Arizona morning. No sound, no shouting, no words. Just 750 people standing together in the specific silence that is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something that does not need it. Emily stood on the top step with her folder against her chest and her hands finally shaking without apology. And she looked at the street full of people who had driven through the night and ridden through the dawn to stand silently on a sidewalk for a man they mostly had not known, because he was the kind of man worth standing for. She did not cry on the steps. She saved that for later. What she did instead was straighten her back and lift her chin and look out at all of it, the bikes, the riders, the helmets raised against the Arizona sky, and she pressed her hand flat over her heart. She held it there for 3 full seconds. 750 people saw her do it, and every single one of them understood exactly what it meant. The first engine started 3 minutes after Emily walked back inside. Not in celebration, not in noise. One engine, then two, then a low rolling sound that moved through the street the way a tide moves, unhurried and inevitable, as 750 riders prepared to leave the same way they had arrived. In order, in discipline, with the particular dignity of people who had come to make a point and had made it and did not need to extend the moment beyond what it required. Marcus watched them go from the sidewalk. He was not leaving yet. He was waiting for Emily. She came back out 20 minutes after she had gone in with Paul beside her and Donna, who had driven up from Phoenix that morning and had been standing in the crowd the entire time without Emily knowing. Donna had not told Emily she was coming because Donna had correctly calculated that telling Emily in advance would result in Emily telling her she did not need to come, and Donna had long ago stopped listening to Emily's assessments of what Emily needed. When Emily saw her sister-in-law on the sidewalk, she stopped walking. Donna opened her arms. Emily walked into them and held on. She did not cry. She had made a decision about crying on the steps, and she was holding to it not because crying was wrong, but because she had learned over the past 4 weeks that she cried better alone in the kitchen in the dark, where the grief had space to be exactly what it was without an audience that would feel responsible for it. She held on to Donna for a moment and then stepped back and looked at her. "You drove 4 hours," Emily said. 3.5, Donna said. "I made good time. You should have told me. You would have told me not to come. I would have been right." "You would have been wrong," Donna said. "You just don't know it yet." Emily looked at her for a moment. Then something in her face shifted just slightly, the way faces shift when the thing they have been holding finally finds a crack to move through. "They reversed it," she said. Donna's eyes filled immediately. "I know," Donna said. "I was watching through the window. I saw your face when you came out. They're restoring everything. All of it. The back benefits, the record, everything." "Oh, Em." "Jack's official record is going to be corrected. It's going to say he died during the performance of his duties. That's what it's going to say. Emily's voice stayed even, but just barely. That's what it should have said from the beginning. Donna took her hands and held them. Marcus stepped forward. He had been standing a few feet back, giving them space the way a man gives space when he understands that some moments are not his to occupy. But now he stepped forward and Emily turned to him and he looked at her and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "How do you feel?" Emily thought about that honestly. "Like I just ran a race I didn't train for," she said. "Did you win?" "We won." Marcus nodded slowly. "Jack would be furious," he said. "Absolutely mortified," Emily agreed. "He'd spend the next 6 months telling everyone it was unnecessary and he could have handled it with a letter." "He would have been completely wrong," Emily said. "He would have been completely wrong," Marcus agreed. They looked at each other for a moment with the specific understanding of two people who had loved the same person in different ways and were now standing on the other side of something that person would never get to see. Paul Mercer stepped up beside Emily. "I need to go over a few things before I drive back," he said. "Paperwork, timelines, what to expect in the next 2 weeks." Emily nodded. "Can we do it somewhere that has coffee?" Paul almost smiled. "I was going to suggest the diner on Cedar Street." "Give me 5 minutes," Emily said. She turned back to Marcus. "I need to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "The writers who came, how many of them took time off work to be here? How many of them drove through the night?" Marcus considered not answering that question. Then he considered who was asking it and decided she deserved the honest version. "Most of them," he said. "The ones from Nevada left yesterday. Danny Flores drove straight from Las Vegas at 3 in the morning." Emily absorbed that. "I want to write them a letter," she said. "All of them, or as many of them as I can reach. I want them to know I want to say," she stopped. "Try it again. How do you thank 750 people for something like this?" Marcus thought about it. "You don't thank them," he said. "You let them know it mattered." "Those are different things." Emily looked at him. "That's very Jack of you to say." Marcus looked slightly startled by that. Then he ducked his head in a way that was almost bashful and was completely at odds with the rest of him, and Emily thought that was probably the most accurate thing that she had seen all day. She went to the diner with Paul and Donna. Paul walked her through the timeline with the systematic patience that she had come to understand was his natural register. Benefits reinstated effective immediately. Back payments calculated from the date of termination, returning everything that had been withheld. Official record amended with the corrected language within 30 days. The referral of Gerald's audit report to the county administrator's office, which was a separate process on its own timeline, with its own potential implications that Paul described carefully without overpromising about where it would lead. Emily listened to all of it. She drank her coffee. She asked clear questions and received clear answers. When Paul finished, she said, "What happens to Holloway?" Paul set down his cup carefully. "That depends on what the administrator's review finds," he said. "If the audit report is taken seriously and given that it was produced by a career internal auditor and names 11 specific cases, I believe there will be an independent review of those cases. If the pattern Sandra described is confirmed, there are multiple potential outcomes. Administrative action, forced resignation. In more serious scenarios, depending on what the review determines about intent, there are other possibilities." "Do you think he knew what he was doing?" Emily asked. "When he signed mine, do you think he knew the employment documentation didn't support it?" Paul was quiet for a moment. "I think he said that he made a very fast decision based on an incomplete review of the facts. I think he saw what he expected to see. I think he expected you not to fight." Another pause. "Whether that constitutes negligence or something more deliberate is not something I can determine. But the review will." Emily nodded. "I want the other families to get what we got today," she said. "That's the most likely outcome of the review," Paul said. "I can't promise it, but the referral is a significant development as well. Gerald's report gives them the framework to work from." Emily looked at the table for a moment. "Sandra and Gerald," she said, "what's going to happen to them for coming forward?" "They're retired," Paul said. "The county has limited leverage, and what they did testifying with documented evidence in a formal proceeding is protected." He paused. "They knew what they were doing. They made an informed choice." Emily thought about Sandra's posture at the microphone. That erect, decided posture of a woman who had been waiting 2 years to stand in exactly that spot. I need to call them, Emily said. I have their numbers, Paul said. Not today. Give me a day. She pressed her hands around her coffee cup. I need a day to just breathe. Take whatever you need, Paul said. The hard part is over. Emily looked at him. The hard part is over, she repeated, not questioning it, just sitting with it, feeling the shape of that sentence in her mouth. The hard part was over. 4 weeks and 3 days after a deputy had knocked on her door to tell her that the flash flood on Highway 60 had taken her husband. The hard part was over. She was not sure she believed that entirely. She was not sure the hard part ever became fully past tense when the person you had lost was still gone. But the particular hard part of the past 4 weeks, the letter and the medal, and the 30-day deadline, and the appeal, and the preparation, and the hearing room, and 3.5 hours of sitting very still while the thing Jack had worked for 18 years to provide for her was either going to be taken or returned, that part was over. She put down her coffee cup and looked out the window of the diner. 2 motorcycles were still parked across the street. Their riders were standing beside them, talking to each other unhurried. They were not from Red Valley. She did not recognize them. They were just 2 people who had ridden from somewhere else and were in no hurry to begin the ride back. She watched them for a moment. Then her phone rang. The number was local. Red Valley, a number she did not recognize. She answered. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice was male mid-range, carrying the specific flatness of someone who was working very hard at sounding neutral. My name is David Kerr. I'm a reporter with the Red Valley Gazette. I was outside City Hall this morning. I was wondering if you might be willing to speak with me about today's hearing. Emily looked at Paul across the table. Paul raised his eyebrows. Your call. Mr. Kerr, Emily said, I appreciate you calling. I don't have much to say that the hearing record won't say better. The board reviewed the evidence and corrected their decision. I'm grateful. There's been a lot of public interest in this case, Kerr said. The photo from this morning has been shared about 40,000 times on social media. As of an hour ago, I think a lot of people want to hear from you directly. Emily processed that number. 40,000. What would you want to ask me? She said. Honestly, just one question, Kerr said. What do you want people to understand about your husband? Not about the case, not about the pension, about Jack Whitmore as a person. Emily was quiet for a moment. She thought about it. She thought about Tuesday evenings and the card in the jacket pocket and the kid named Travis and the housing board letter and a failed alternator on Route 89 and 12 years of a friendship that did not need maintenance to stay solid and the way Jack used to complain about the desert heat while secretly loving it because it was honest. He was the most quietly decent person I ever knew, she said. He did not do good things for credit. He did not keep track of what he was owed. He pulled over when someone needed help because he was there, and he could, and in his mind, that was the whole of it. She paused. I want people to understand that those people exist. That kind of person is real, and they walk around in the world doing things nobody knows about, and the world is entirely dependent on them and mostly never acknowledges it. Jack was one of those people. Another pause. I want people to remember that. Not the hearing, not the pension, him. A silence on the other end. Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, Kerr said quietly. You're welcome. She hung up. Donna was looking at her across the table. That was good, Donna said. It was honest, Emily said. Same thing. The piece Kerr published that evening was short, 300 words. A summary of the hearing outcome, a quote from Paul Mercer about the legal dimensions of the case, and Emily's answer to the one question verbatim. No dramatic framing, no inflammatory language, just the facts and the words. It was shared 90,000 times by midnight. The next morning, Emily woke at 5:45. This time, when the 40 seconds came and went, and the world hardened back into what it was, she lay still for a moment longer than usual. Not because she was avoiding getting up, because she was trying to locate something inside herself that felt different from how it had felt yesterday morning. Something was different. It took her a moment to identify it. The weight on her chest was the same. Jack was still gone. The house was still quiet in the same particular way. The space on the other side of the bed was still the same space. But underneath the grief in the place where the past 4 weeks had added a specific additional pressure, the pressure of the letter and the deadline and the math and the possibility of losing the only physical place Jack still existed, that pressure was gone. She could feel where it had been by its absence. She got up. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the wall where Jack's photograph hung. Next to it, the empty space where the medal had been. The medal. She had not thought about the medal since yesterday. The reversal of her benefits had been documented. The record amendment had been set in motion. But the medal, the actual physical object that 2 county representatives had removed from her wall and taken away in a county vehicle, had not been mentioned in the hearing. She called Paul at 8:30. "The medal," she said when he answered. A brief pause. "Then I was going to bring this up today. The benefit reversal is the primary legal instrument, and that's been executed. The medal is a separate item. I believe it falls under personal property wrongfully removed, and the county is on the hook for its return, but I want to confirm the specific process." "How long will that take?" "I'm going to call the county administrator's office today," Paul said. "Given where we are, I do not expect them to be difficult about this." "Thank you," Emily said. She hung up and refilled her coffee and stood there a while longer looking at the empty space. Then she went to the spare bedroom and sat on the floor in front of the filing cabinet and pulled out Jack's riding jacket and held it across her lap. She did not go through the pockets this time. She just held it. The leather was cold from the closet, but it warmed quickly against her hands. She sat with it for a long time and let herself be still and quiet in the particular way that does not require explanation or justification, the way you can be still and quiet when the acute emergency has passed and the ordinary ongoing grief is what remains. She thought about the hearing. She thought about Maria Reyes at the microphone, the words Maria had chosen, the way she had looked directly at Holloway when she said the word reckless, the way Sophia had given Emily a folded card from her jacket pocket. Emily had read the card last night alone in the kitchen after Donna drove back to Phoenix. It was drawn in crayon, a drawing of a man in a car in water and a family standing safely on the bank above it. Stick figures with round heads and careful detail in the proportions. The man was bigger than the others and had a circle on his chest that was clearly meant to be a badge or a medal. Below the drawing, in the careful print of an 8-year-old working very hard at letters, it said, "Thank you for my family." Emily had put the card on the kitchen table and looked at it for a very long time. Then she had found a frame in the spare bedroom and put the card inside it. She was going to put it on the wall, next to Jack's photograph, next to the space where the medal would come back to. 3 days after the hearing, Richard Holloway submitted his letter of resignation to the county administrator's office. The letter was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph cited personal reasons and a desire to pursue other professional opportunities. The second paragraph, which was not required and which his attorney had advised him not to include but which Holloway had written anyway and refused to remove, was 3 sentences long. It said, "The Whitmore determination was made without sufficient review of the relevant employment documentation. That failure was mine. I accept responsibility for it." His attorney had read those 3 sentences 4 times and then looked at Holloway and said, "You understand, this complicates your position with respect to the administrator's review." "I know," Holloway had said. "It could be used as an admission." "I know what it is," Holloway said. "Put it in." The letter was made public by the county administrator's office as a matter of standard transparency policy. Emily read it at the kitchen table. She read it twice. Then she set it down and looked at the window for a while. Paul called her that afternoon. "Did you see the letter?" he asked. "I saw it." "The second paragraph is significant. His attorney is not happy about it." "I know." "How do you feel about it?" Emily thought about that carefully. "I don't feel triumphant," she said. "If that's what you're asking, he made a bad decision and he's dealing with the consequences of it. I don't feel good about a person dealing with consequences." She paused. "I feel like it's the right thing. The consequences being real is the right thing, but I don't take pleasure in it." "That's very measured of you." "I've had a lot of practice being measured." "Have you given any thought to the other families?" Paul asked. "The ones Sandra mentioned?" "I've thought about them every day since Sandra testified," Emily said. "Do you know who they are?" "The administrator's review will identify them," Paul said. "Once they're identified, they'll be notified. They'll have the same right to appeal that you had." "Will someone help them the way you helped me?" A pause. "I'm going to make some calls," Paul said. "There are colleagues of mine who specialize in this area. I want to make sure anyone coming out of this review has access to adequate representation." Emily was quiet for a moment. Will you let me know when you know, she said, when the families are identified. You don't have to share their information. I understand privacy, but I want to know that someone is reaching out to them. I'll keep you informed, Paul said. Thank you, Paul. Emily. He paused, which was unusual for him. Paul Mercer was not a man who paused in the middle of sentences. In 20 years of pension law, I have not had a client who walked into a pro bono initial consultation with 11 pages of self-documented evidence and a cross-referenced employment statute citation. Another pause. What you did into the weeks before the hearing, most people would not have known to do that. Jack was organized, Emily said. I learned it from him. Regardless, Paul said, you won this case before I got involved. Emily looked at the wall, at Jack's photograph, at Sophia's drawing in its frame. We won it together, she said, all of us. The medal came back on a Thursday, not with county representatives, not with a receipt to sign. Paul had been correct that the county was not going to be difficult about it, and the mechanism of its return was a phone call from the county administrator's office to Paul, who related to Emily, who drove to a county building on the south side of Red Valley and received it from a clerk who was clearly uncomfortable about the circumstances of what he was returning and expressed this discomfort through an excess of apologetic language that Emily accepted graciously without making him feel worse about it. She drove home with it on the passenger seat beside her. She sat in the driveway for a moment after she parked. She looked at it. It was in a clear plastic evidence-style bag sealed. A round medal on a Ribbon County seal on one face, a line of text on the other that read, 15 years of dedicated service, John R. Whitmore. She picked it up. She carried it inside. She stood in front of the wall. Jack's photograph, Sophia's drawing in its frame, the folded funeral flag in its triangle case that had never been moved. She took the medal out of the bag carefully. She found the hook it had hung on the small nail that had been there when they moved in, and that Jack had decided was perfectly placed for exactly this purpose when the medal arrived. She hung it back on the nail. She stepped back. She looked at the wall for a long time. Then she said to the photograph, to the flag, to the empty house, I got it back. The house was quiet around her, but it was the right kind of quiet. That evening, Marcus called. He had heard about the medal from someone in the chapter who had heard it from someone in town, which was how news moved in Red Valley when it was moving at the right speed. It's back on the wall, Emily said. Good, Marcus said. I wanted to ask you something. Ask. The Facebook group, Emily said. Ride for Emily Whitmore. Did you know who started it? A brief pause. I have a guess, Marcus said. Hukayan, Danny Flores' nephew, Marcus said. He's 18 and he runs social media for the Las Vegas chapter. He heard about the situation from Danny and put something up, and it found people who needed to find it. Emily absorbed that. 18 years old, she said. He's a good kid. I want to send him something, Emily said. I don't know what. I want him to know. I'll get you his information, Marcus said. Thank you. A pause. Marcus, Emily said, what happens now for you and your people? You go back to your regular lives. We were always in our regular lives, Marcus said. This was part of it. Emily thought about that. I've been thinking about something, she said. The other families, the ones from Sandra's testimony, the ones who got letters like mine and didn't have a card in a jacket pocket. What about them? I keep thinking that they're out there right now, doing the math at their kitchen tables, not knowing they have 30 days, not knowing there's a pension law attorney who will do a pro bono consultation, not knowing that Gerald's audit report even exists. She paused. I want there to be something, some way for people in that situation to know who to call, not to cause trouble, just to know they're not alone. Marcus was quiet for a moment. What are you thinking? I don't know yet, Emily said honestly. I'm thinking out loud. Keep thinking out loud, Marcus said. When you land somewhere specific, let me know. We've got a network that knows how to move information. I know you do, Emily said. I watched you use it. Another pause. Emily, Marcus said, I need to tell you something. His voice had shifted slightly, not dramatically, but enough that she heard it. What? At the hearing, he said, when you came out the door, the way you stood there. He stopped. Tried again. 12 years I knew Jack, and I watched him do 100 things like what you did today. Stand in a room and hold the line and not flinch. I watched him do it on the highway and in the chapter room and in places where it cost him something. And watching you, he stopped again. You had his backbone, Emily, exactly his. Emily pressed her hand over her mouth. She had been doing so well. She breathed through it. He taught me, she said when she trusted her voice again. 18 years, he taught me how to stand still in a storm. He taught you well, Marcus said. She sat at the kitchen table after the call with her hands around a cold cup of chamo and looked at the wall. Jack's photograph, Sophia's drawing, the flag, the metal back on its nail, the things that the letter had tried to reduce to a file number, the things that had refused to be reduced. She reached across the table and picked up the notepad, the one she had been writing everything in for 4 weeks. The notes, the citations, the timelines, the questions, the 3 pages she had written about the day the county representatives came to her house. She flipped to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote 2 words. What next? Not a question, a heading. Because Emily Whitmore had spent 4 weeks discovering something that Jack had known for most of his adult life, which was that the work of doing right by people was not a finite project with a completion date. It was a practice. It was a Tuesday evening. It was pulling over when someone needed help because you were there and you could, and those 2 facts were sufficient. She did not know yet what form it would take. She did not know what she was going to build or organize or fight for. She knew only that the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom still had space in it, and the notepad still had blank pages, and somewhere out there were other families sitting at kitchen tables doing math they should not have to do. She picked up the pen. She began to write. Outside, the Arizona evening was settling into the particular quality of desert dusk, that brief window when the heat releases its grip on the air, and the sky goes colors that do not translate into language, and the world feels for just a few minutes like it is taking a breath. Emily wrote for an hour. When she finally set down the pen, she had 4 pages. Not a plan exactly. Not yet, but the beginning of one. She capped the pen and put it on the table beside the notepad and stood up and stretched and looked at the wall one more time. I'm not done, she said to the photograph, in case you were wondering. She turned and went to make a fresh cup of coffee. There was work to do. The 4 pages Emily had written the night before were still on the kitchen table when she woke up the next morning. She had not dreamed. For the first time in 5 weeks, she had slept the full night through without waking at 2 a.m. with a racing mind or lying rigid in the dark, arguing with her own body's refusal to rest. She woke at 5:45 because her body still expected Jack's alarm, and she lay still for the 40 seconds, and then she got up. She read what she had written while the coffee brewed. In the daylight, it looked different than it had in the evening. Not worse, just more real. The night before, it had been the beginning of something abstract, a shape she could feel but not quite see. In the morning light, it was 4 pages of handwriting that said specific things about specific problems and specific people who needed specific help. She read it twice. Then she picked up the pen and added 3 more lines at the bottom of the 4th page. Call Sandra, call Gerald, call Paul. Not separately, together. She had been thinking about this since the hearing. Since Sandra had stood at the microphone with that 2-year decision finally made and named 4 cases and a pattern. Since Gerald had produced an audit report he had kept in a personal file for 18 months because he had not known what else to do with the truth when the institution responsible for it had chosen to put it in a drawer. These were people who had seen something wrong and had not had a mechanism for doing anything about it. Emily understood that feeling with a precision that still surprised her. She called Paul first. He answered at 8:15, which told her he had been at his desk for at least an hour already. I want to have a conversation, she said. You, me, Sandra, Gerald, together. Not about any specific case. About whether there is something that could exist that doesn't exist yet. A pause. What kind of something, Paul asked. A way for people to know what their rights are before the deadline is already running, Emily said. A phone number, a website, something that says, if you got a letter like this, here is what you should know. Here is who can help you. Here is the fact that you have 30 days and those 30 days matter. She paused. I didn't know any of that. I had a card in a jacket pocket with the phone number. Most people don't have that. Paul was quiet for a moment. You're talking about a resource organization, he said. I'm talking about whatever it needs to be, Emily said. I don't know what form it takes. I know what it does. It means that the next widow who gets a letter like mine doesn't sit at her kitchen table alone for 4 days, doing math before she figures out she can fight back. Another pause. Longer. I want you to know, Paul said carefully, that what you're describing is not a small thing. It has legal complexity, funding requirements, organizational infrastructure. I know, Emily said. I'm not asking you to build it today. I'm asking you to sit in a room with me and Sandra and Gerald and think about whether it's possible. Paul exhaled slowly. When he said, this week if you can. Thursday, Paul said. Thursday. Emily agreed. She called Sandra next. Sandra picked up on the first ring. I was wondering when you'd call, Sandra said. Not critically. The way you say something when you have been expecting a conversation and are relieved it is finally arriving. Thursday, Emily said. Paul's office in Scottsdale. Can you come? I'll be there, Sandra said. How are you? Emily asked. It was the first time she had asked Sandra this. In all the preparation for the hearing, in all the conversations with Paul about what Sandra would say and how she would say it, Emily had not once asked Sandra how she was. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Lighter, she said finally. I feel lighter than I have in a long time. Emily understood that completely. Me too, she said. Gerald Pruitt said yes before Emily finished the sentence. He said it with the voice of a man who had been waiting for something to say yes to, since he filed an audit report that went into a drawer 18 months ago, and the relief in his single word was so plain and so human that Emily had to take a breath after she hung up. She sat at the kitchen table with her hands around her coffee cup and looked at the 4 pages and the 3 added lines and thought about what Jack would say if he could see what she was setting in motion. He would tell her she was taking on too much. He would say it while quietly moving his Tuesday evenings around to help her do it. That was the truth of it. That was always the truth of it with Jack. The protests were real. The help was realer. She smiled at the table, then she called Marcus. Thursday, she told him, Paul's office, Sandra, Gerald. Paul, me, we're going to figure out what comes next. You move fast, Marcus said. I've been slow for 5 weeks, Emily said. I'm done being slow. What do you need from me? Not yet, Emily said, but I'll know soon. When I know, I'll call. I'll answer, Marcus said. 2 days before the Thursday meeting, the county administrator's office released the preliminary findings of its review of Gerald's audit report. Paul called Emily at 7 in the evening. Sit down, he said. I'm already sitting. The preliminary review confirmed 6 cases, not 4-6, where benefit terminations during the relevant period show the same pattern Sandra described. Insufficient review of employment documentation. Rapid decisions. The voluntary personal risk clause applied in circumstances where the claimant's job description arguably excluded its application. Emily pressed her hand flat on the table. 6 families, she said. 6 confirmed so far. The review is ongoing. They may identify more. What happens to those families now? The administrator's office is notifying them this week, Paul said. They'll be informed of their right to appeal and of the preliminary findings. The county is, and this is significant, Emily, the county is not waiting for the appeals to be filed. They are proactively reaching out. Emily absorbed that. Why, she said, why proactively? That's not how they operated before. Because, Paul said, and she could hear something in his voice that was close to satisfaction, but was more precise than that, the satisfaction of a man who has watched a system recalibrate because it had no other viable option. The Gerald Pruitt audit report is now a public document. Sandra's testimony is part of a public hearing record. The Facebook group has 112,000 members as of this morning. And the county administrator is a man who is running for state office in 14 months. Emily was quiet. So they're doing the right thing, she said, for complicated reasons. The right thing sometimes gets done for complicated reasons, Paul said. The families still get their benefits restored. That's what matters. Are any of them, do you know anything about them? The 6 families. I know some of it, Paul said carefully. One is a family in Chandler. The husband was a sanitation worker. He had a cardiac event on the bus, and the county terminated the wife's survivor benefits, using the same clause arguing the event was caused by pre-existing personal health conditions as unrelated to employment. The wife is 62. She has been living on savings for 14 months. Emily closed her eyes. 14 months. Are any of them in immediate financial distress? She asked. Potentially, Paul said. The review will determine that more specifically. When it does, Emily said, I want to know. Emily, I'm not going to do anything rash, she said. I just want to know, so that when the Thursday meeting happens, I have the full picture. Paul paused. I'll share what I can, he said. After she hung up, Emily sat at the table for a long time. 6 families, 6 kitchen tables, 6 sets of hands holding letters, 6 people who had been calculated as unlikely to fight back effectively. One of them had been doing that math for 14 months. Emily stood up and went to the wall and looked at Jack's photograph and the metal on its nail and Sophia's drawing in its frame. 6, she said quietly. She did not say anything else. She did not need to. The Thursday meeting lasted 4 hours. Paul's office in Scottsdale had a conference room with a long table and a whiteboard and a window that let in enough afternoon light to make the space feel less institutional than it might have otherwise. Emily arrived first, then Sandra, then Gerald, who brought a folder so thick it required a rubber band to hold it closed. Paul came in last, set his coffee on the table, looked at the 3 of them and said, "Before we start, I want to say something off the record." The 3 of them looked at him. "What the 4 of us did 2 weeks ago," Paul said, "was the kind of thing that is supposed to happen in this system and almost never does. A person was wronged, evidence was gathered and presented, the system corrected itself. That almost never happens cleanly." He paused. "I want us to remember that before we talk about all the ways it doesn't work, because what we're about to try to build only works if we believe it can." Sandra looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at Emily. Emily looked at Paul. "Okay," she said, "let's build it." They talked for 4 hours. They talked about the problem, first pension benefit terminations, where the clause is applied too rapidly and to people who lack the resources or information to challenge it. Gerald's audit had identified 6 confirmed cases. Sandra believed there were more in other counties using similar statutory language. This was not a Red Valley problem. This was an Arizona problem. It potentially a national problem. They talked about what had made the Whitmore case different, the attorney. Paul being there, being willing to work pro bono, knowing the precise statute language, knowing how to cross-reference employment documentation. Most people in Emily's situation did not have access to that. Most people in Emily's situation did not know that access was what they needed. They talked about the gap between the letter arriving and the 30-day clock starting, and the moment when a person in that situation would know who to call. "What closes the gap?" Emily asked. "Information," Gerald said immediately. He had been waiting for this question. The county pension documentation is public record. Employment records are accessible. The statute language is public. The problem isn't that the information doesn't exist. The problem is that the people who need it don't know where to find it and don't know what to do with it when they do. "So we make a map," Emily said. Everyone looked at her. "A plain language guide," she said. "What the letter means, what the clause means, what your rights are, what the 30-day deadline means, where to call. Written for someone who has never thought about pension law in their life and just got a letter that told them their future was being taken." She paused. "Written for me 4 weeks ago." Sandra was nodding slowly. "And a hotline," Sandra said, "a number. One number that goes somewhere real, not a recording, a person." "Who staffs it?" Paul asked. "That's the infrastructure question," Gerald said. "That's where we need to figure out what we're building and who supports it." They talked about funding, about nonprofit status, about whether this should be a legal aid organization, an advocacy organization, an information clearinghouse, or some combination. Paul described the landscape of existing organizations and where the gaps in their coverage were. Sandra described what the county process looked like from the inside and where people fell through. Gerald opened his folder and began producing documents that detailed the pattern he had seen and the counties he believed were operating similarly. Emily listened to all of it and took notes and asked questions, and at one point said, "We're making this too complicated." Everyone stopped. "Not the work," she said. "The work is complicated. But the first thing, the most important thing, is simple. Someone gets a letter. They don't know what it means. They don't know they can fight it. They don't know who to call." She put down her pen. "That's the problem we solve first. Everything else grows from that." Paul looked at her for a moment. "A hotline," he said, "and a one-page guide that goes out whenever a termination letter is issued." "Yes," Emily said. "Getting the county to include the guide with the letter. is our first ask, Emily said. And given where they are right now with 6 confirmed improper terminations and a review still ongoing and a county administrator running for state office in 14 months, I think they will say yes. Paul sat back in his chair. You have been thinking about this for a while, he said. I've been thinking about this since I sat at my kitchen table with that letter, Emily said. I've had 5 weeks. It was Sandra who said what all of them were thinking. We need a name, she said. Whatever this is, it needs a name. The table was quiet for a moment. Emily looked at the whiteboard where 4 hours of conversation had accumulated in Paul's handwriting. She thought about the card in the jacket pocket. The 6 words, if it ever gets this bad call. The Jack Whitmore resource line, she said. No one argued. No one suggested an alternative. Paul wrote it on the whiteboard. They stayed another 40 minutes working out the immediate next steps. Paul would begin the legal framework for a nonprofit filing. Gerald would compile his full documentation from the audit period into a usable evidence base. Sandra would draft the plain language guide from her institutional knowledge of how these cases move through the system. Emily would request a meeting with the county administrator's office. She was not asking for a meeting to negotiate. She was going to that meeting the way she had gone to the pension office to deliver her appeal with documentation, with clarity, with the specific composure of a woman who had already done the hard part and was now moving into what came next. The county administrator, whose name was Thomas Garfield, and who was indeed in the early stages of planning a state senate campaign, received Emily and Paul in his office on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after the Thursday meeting. His handshake was firm in the practiced way of politicians calibrated to communicate both authority and warmth simultaneously. His office had the tidy self-presentation of someone who understood that environments communicate things about their occupants. He had read the guide Emily had sent in advance. She could tell because he had printed it and there were pen marks on it. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, I want to start by saying personally and on behalf of this county that what happened in your case should not have happened. The original determination was made without adequate review, and the process that led to it is under investigation. Thank you, Emily said. I appreciate that. I'd like to talk about what comes next. Garfield looked at her. He had expected she realized something different. He had expected a widow with grievances, perhaps some emotional testimony, perhaps a request for additional financial remedy beyond what had already been ordered. He had prepared for that meeting. He had not prepared for a woman who came in with a printed guide and a nonprofit framework and a specific request. She presented the resource line concept in 12 minutes. She showed him the plain language guide Sandra had drafted. She showed him the hotline structure Paul had outlined. She made the specific ask that going forward, every benefit termination letter issued by the county pension office would include a 1-page insert directing recipients to the resource line and explaining their rights in plain language. Garfield read the 1-page insert. He read it twice. Then he looked at Emily over the top of the paper. You're asking us to actively inform people of their right to challenge our own decisions, he said. Yes, Emily said, because it's the right thing to do, and because she paused. The cost of not doing it for this county has become very clear. The sentence landed with the precise weight she had intended. Garfield set down the paper. I'll need to run this through legal, he said. Of course, Emily said, and I'll need to consult with the pension board on implementation. Of course. But in principle, Garfield said, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who had just made a calculation and arrived at a conclusion he was going to live with. In principle, I support this. Emily drove home from Scottsdale with the windows down. The Arizona afternoon was exactly what it always was at that time of year. Direct and honest and entirely itself, and she drove with the wind moving through the car and thought about Jack, who had loved this kind of driving. Windows down, no music, just the road and the air, and whatever your mind was going to do with the silence. Her phone rang at the first stoplight. Marcus. How did it go? He asked. He said yes in principle. A pause. In principle, Marcus repeated. It means yes with paperwork, Emily said. She heard something on his end that was close to a laugh. What do you need from us? Marcus asked. The chapter, the network. What can we do? Emily had thought about this. Tell people about the resource line, she said. When it's running, anyone who knows someone who got a letter like mine, anyone who knows a family sitting at a kitchen table doing math, they shouldn't have to do alone. Tell them there's a number to call. We can do that, Marcus said. We're good at moving information. I know, Emily said. I watched you use it. Emily, Marcus said, there's something else. His voice had shifted. She heard it. What, she said? The 6 families, Marcus said, from the administrator's review. I know you know about them. Paul told me some of what he could tell me. There's a woman in Chandler, 62 years old. Her husband was a sanitation worker. She's been on savings for 14 months. I know about her, Emily said quietly. Her name is Ruth Caldwell, Marcus said. Her husband's name was Thomas. He died on the job 3 years ago. She has a granddaughter who lives with her because the granddaughter's parents are in a difficult situation, and Ruth was the stable option. Until the letter. Emily pressed her hand against the steering wheel. How do you know this? She asked. She came to us, Marcus said. Not to the chapter directly. Someone shared the Facebook group post about your hearing, and she saw it, and she sent a message to the page. 2 days ago, she said she did not know if anyone would respond. She said she had not told anyone about the letter because she was ashamed. Emily's breath caught. She was ashamed, she repeated. She thought it meant she had done something wrong, Marcus said. That's what the letter made her feel, like the termination was her fault, like she had missed something or failed to fill out the right form or made an error somewhere that a smarter person would not have made. Emily closed her eyes. She knew that feeling. She knew it with a precision that hurt. She had felt it for approximately 4 hours after the first letter arrived, before the anger had arrived to replace it. That specific shame of being told by an institution that you did not qualify, that cold bureaucratic language that manages to make the reader feel like the deficiency is theirs. What did you tell her? Emily asked. I told her about your hearing, Marcus said. I told her about Paul and the resource line you're building. I told her that what happened to her was not her fault. He paused. She cried on a Facebook message. She sent me a message that said she cried. Emily was at a red light. She sat at the red light with both hands on the wheel. Give me her number, she said. You sure? Give me her number, Marcus. He gave it to her. She did not call Ruth Caldwell that day. She drove the rest of the way home and went inside and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a while. Then she made dinner, which she had not been doing consistently enough, and knew it. She ate at the table and looked at the notepad with the 4 pages and the 3 added lines in the continued notes from the Thursday meeting. She called Ruth the next morning. Ruth answered on the second ring with the careful voice of someone who answers unknown numbers with equal measures of hope and bracing. Mrs. Caldwell, Emily said, my name is Emily Whitmore. A silence. Then a sound Emily recognized because she had made it herself. Not quite a cry, the sound a person makes when they have been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and someone has just told them without words that they see it. I know who you are, Ruth said. I wanted to call you myself, Emily said. Not through a formal process, just person to person. She paused. The county is going to be reaching out to you about your case. You're going to be notified of your right to appeal, and you're going to have help doing it. I want you to know that before the official letter arrives, because official letters can feel a certain way, and I want you to hear it in a human voice first. Ruth was quiet. Is it real, Ruth asked, or is it more letters? It's real, Emily said. I'm going to give you Paul Mercer's number. He's a pension law attorney. He worked on my case. He's building a resource organization now, and he has colleagues who specialize in exactly your situation. Call him today, this week. Don't wait for the county's letter. Call Paul first. She heard Ruth writing something down. Mrs. Whitmore, Ruth said. Emily. She stopped. How did you do it? I've had this for 14 months. I didn't know I could fight it. I thought I had missed my window. You haven't missed your window, Emily said. The review changes your timeline. Paul will explain. But Ruth, she paused, you didn't miss anything. They counted on you not knowing what to do. That's not your failure. That's theirs. Another silence. Nobody told me that, Ruth said quietly. I know, Emily said. That's what we're going to fix. Ruth called Paul that afternoon. Emily did not know the details of that conversation. She did not need to. She knew Paul's voice when he was in problem-solving mode, and she knew he would handle it with exactly the precision and patience that Ruth Caldwell needed. What she found out 3 days later from Paul was that Ruth Caldwell's case had been identified as one of the 6 in the administrator's review, and that her back benefits amounted to $37,000 over 14 months, and that the county was prepared to restore them in full pending the formal appeal process that Paul was now managing. $37,000, 14 months. A 62-year-old woman and a granddaughter who needed a stable home, and a letter that had made Ruth feel like the fault was hers. Emily sat with that number for a long time. Then she went back to the notepad and kept writing. 6 weeks after the hearing, Emily drove to the Hells Angels chapter house on Oak Street for the first time. Marcus had invited her twice. The first time she had said maybe. The second time she had said soon. The third time, which was a Tuesday evening, she had looked at the clock and thought about Jack and his Tuesday evenings and said yes. She was not sure what she expected. She had formed some image of the place from years of watching Jack exist in the world adjacent to it without ever having been inside it herself. She had imagined something that matched the leather and the bikes and the externally projected toughness. She walked in and found a room full of people eating pizza. Not the fancy kind. The chain kind in flat boxes stacked on a folding table, paper plates, plastic cups. Someone had brought a 2-liter of soda that was already mostly gone. There were maybe 30 people in the room, sitting on folding chairs and a few beat-up couches and standing against the walls. A television in the corner was showing a baseball game with the sound low. A man in his 60s was asleep in an armchair with a paper plate balanced on his chest in a way that defied physics. Marcus saw her from across the room. He crossed toward her and handed her a paper plate. "Get some pizza," he said. "It's Tuesday." She looked at him. "Jack's Tuesday evenings," she said. "Chapter meeting nights," Marcus said. "He came most weeks, sat right there." He nodded towards a chair near the window, and ate terrible pizza and argued about roads. Emily looked at the chair. She looked at the room full of ordinary people eating chain pizza on a Tuesday evening. Fathers, workers, veterans, mechanics. People whose lives did not fit into any single category and who had decided at some point that they preferred the company of others who felt the same way. She took the paper plate. She got some pizza. She sat in the chair near the window. And over the next 2 hours, people came to talk to her. Not all at once, one at a time or in pairs, the way people approach someone at a gathering when they want to say something but are being respectful about the timing of it. They told her things about Jack, stories she had not heard. The kid with the motorcycle repair, the highway breakdown, a time Jack had driven 3 hours to help a chapter member's family move because the member had broken his leg and could not do it himself. A time Jack had sat in a hospital waiting room for 6 hours with a writer he barely knew because the writer's wife was in surgery and Jack had decided that no one should sit alone in a hospital waiting room. She had not known about the hospital waiting room. She had not known about the 3-hour drive. She sat in the chair near the window and listened to people tell her who her husband had been in the hours she had not been watching. At one point, she had to set down the paper plate. At another point, Marcus appeared beside her with a glass of water and did not say anything, just set it on the table next to her. She held it together. She was getting better at that, at holding it together in company and saving the rest for later. It was a skill that was building like a callus, not because the feeling was getting smaller, but because her capacity to carry it was getting larger. Toward the end of the evening, a young man came to sit beside her. He was maybe 19, slight dark-haired with the slightly uncertain body language of someone who has not yet fully arrived in his own skin. He held his paper plate in both hands like he was not sure what else to do with them. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Emily," she said. "Emily." He took a breath. "My name is Travis." She looked at him. Travis. The kid Jack had helped write the housing board letter. She had heard his name from Marcus, but had not connected a face to it. He was looking at her with eyes that were very young and very earnest and carrying something heavy. "I know who you are," she said. "He spent 2 Tuesday evenings helping me," Travis said. "I was going to lose my apartment. I didn't know how to write a formal complaint. I didn't know what any of it meant. He sat at the table with me and looked up every code and wrote it out and explained every part of it." He stopped. "I kept the apartment. I've been in it for 8 months because of those 2 Tuesday evenings." He looked down at his plate. "I don't know how to say what that means." Emily looked at this 19-year-old boy in a chair on a Tuesday evening and thought about Jack sitting at the same table 2 Tuesday evenings, helping him find words for a system that had not been built with him in mind. "You don't have to say what it means," Emily said. "You already said it." Travis looked up. "I'm going to pass it on," he said. "Whatever I can do for someone else, I'm going to pass it on." Emily held that sentence for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand briefly on his arm, the way you touch someone when words are almost but not quite sufficient. That's all he ever wanted, she said. Just pass it on. Travis nodded. He looked like he might say something else. Instead, he just nodded again and got up and went back across the room. Emily sat for a while longer, then Marcus materialized beside her. You okay? He said. More than okay, she said. He sat in the chair Travis had vacated. So, he said, the resource line. What do you need? Emily turned to look at him. Right now, writers who know how to move information, she said. When the hotline goes live, when the guide is ready, I need people to know it exists before they need it, not after. We can do that, Marcus said. I know you can. What else? Emily thought about it. I need someone to check on Ruth Caldwell, she said. In Chandler, the woman from the Facebook message. She has a granddaughter. She's been alone with this for 14 months. I need someone in her area to not do anything official. Just know she's there. Know she's okay. Marcus looked at her for a moment. There's a chapter in Chandler, he said. I know, Emily said. Jack told me. Marcus pulled out his phone. He sent a message while she watched. 30 seconds later, his phone buzzed. Done, he said. Emily looked at him. That fast, she said. That fast, Marcus said. That's all it ever is. Someone knowing to look. She thought about that. She thought about this card in the jacket pocket. The one phone number. The 6 words. The entire architecture of what had happened over the past 6 weeks built on the single fact that Jack had believed with the uncomplicated conviction of a man who had spent his whole life proving it true, that the difference between someone surviving the unsurvivable and not surviving it was often nothing more than knowing there was someone to call. She thought about Ruth Caldwell crying in a Facebook message. She thought about the 62-year-old woman who had been ashamed. She thought about the $37,000 and the 14 months and the granddaughter who needed a stable home. She thought about Travis and 2 Tuesday evenings and a housing complaint that had kept a 19-year-old boy in his apartment. She thought about 750 helmets raised in the Arizona morning. She thought about Sophia Reyes in a crayon drawing and the words, "Thank you for my family," in the careful print of an 8-year-old who had been pulled from a flooding van by a man who had decided in the space of a second that her life was worth more than his safety. And she thought about Jack. Not the version of Jack that the pension letter had tried to reduce to a case ID and a clause. The real Jack. The one who pulled over on Route 89 for a stranger with a dead alternator. The one who spent Tuesday evenings helping a kid navigate housing bureaucracy. The one who had left a card in the pocket of his riding jacket because he had understood with that quiet, unsentimental certainty that was the core of him, that the world was not always fair to people who were trying to do right by it, and that the only real answer to that unfairness was making sure nobody had to face it alone. Marcus, Emily said. Yeah. When we launched the resource line, she said, I want the tagline to be something specific. What if it ever gets this bad call, she said. Marcus looked at her. She watched something move through his face. Not a smile exactly. Something older and more solid than a smile. That's his, Marcus said. I know, Emily said. That's the point. Outside, the Arizona night was settling in. The desert going quiet in the way it goes quiet when the heat finally releases its grip and the world takes its breath. Somewhere on Oak Street, 2 blocks over 30 motorcycles were parked in front of a building where ordinary people were eating terrible pizza and telling stories and being the kind of community that does not announce itself because it does not need to. Inside the chapter house, Emily Whitmore sat in the chair near the window that had been Jack's chair on his Tuesday evenings, and she felt something she had not expected to feel again this soon. Not happiness exactly, something harder than happiness and more lasting. The specific feeling of a person who has walked through the worst thing and come out the other side not unchanged but not destroyed either, and has looked around at what remains and found that what remains is enough to build from. She had a notepad with 6 pages of notes. She had Paul Mercer and Sandra and Gerald and a county administrator who had said yes in principle. She had Marcus and a network that knew how to move information. She had Travis saying, I'm going to pass it on. She had Ruth Caldwell, who had been ashamed for 14 months and was no longer alone. She had a wall at home with a photograph and a medal and a flag and a crayon drawing and a frame. She had the card. She would always have the card. And she had 6 words that Jack Whitmore had written in his large, uneven handwriting and tucked into the inside pocket of his riding jacket for a day he hoped would never come, because he had known the way people who truly love someone know things that even the unsurvivable could be survived, if the person surviving it knew there was a number to dial. Emily Whitmore picked up her paper plate. She finished her pizza. She sat in Jack's chair on a Tuesday evening and listened to people tell stories about her husband, and she let herself be held by those stories the way you let yourself be held by something that has already proven it will not let you fall. The Jack Whitmore resource line went live 11 weeks after the hearing. On the first day, it received 23 calls. By the end of the first month, it had received 411. Every single caller got a person on the line. Every person on the line gave the same first answer, the one Emily had written at the top of the protocol document, in the same steady handwriting she had used for 11 pages of formal appeal documentation. You are not alone. You have more time than you think, and you absolutely have the right to fight this. Jack Whitmore never knew his name would go on a door. He never knew that the card he left in his jacket pocket would become the first line of something larger than either of them could have imagined. He never knew that 750 people would raise their helmets in his name on an Arizona morning, or that a woman named Ruth would stop being ashamed, or that a 19-year-old kid named Travis would carry his Tuesday evenings forward into his own life like a torch he had been trusted to hold. He just knew that no person should be left behind. He just knew that pulling over was always worth it. He just knew that the world ran on the Tuesday evenings of people nobody was watching, and that those people were the whole of it, the actual load-bearing structure of everything that held, and that if you were lucky enough to be one of them, the right thing to do with that luck was spend it. Jack Whitmore spent it, every last bit of it. And the world he left behind, the real world, the one built from what people do when nobody is watching, was larger and stronger and more full of light for having had him in it. That was the truth the pension letter could not touch. That was the truth the hearing had not created, but had simply made visible. That was the truth that 750 riders had driven through the night to stand in the quiet Arizona morning and bear witness to. Some things cannot be taken. Some legacies cannot be terminated by a letter. Some people leave the world so thoroughly woven into the lives around them that removing them only reveals how much of the structure was theirs all along. Jack Whitmore was one of those people, and now finally everyone knew it.